I stand in front of the meticulously prepared feast, rendered speechless by the effort I've poured into it. Yet, as I glance around the table, my heart sinks. Why would Mia, my esteemed brother-in-law's wife, be so mercilessly cold towards me? Sophia, a 27-year-old office worker, shares her life with her husband Tom and their 3-year-old son. Tom, her senior by 4 years, and she initially embarked on a relationship rooted in professional dynamics. Their connection blossomed over shared drinks, leading to a romance that culminated in marriage just a year later. Now, nestled in their cozy home, they relish the joy of parenthood and the promise of a growing family. However, amidst this domestic bliss, a thorn emerges: Mia, the wife of Tom's brother Jack. Let me introduce you to Tom and Jack. Tom is Jack's elder brother by 10 years. Their father tragically passed away in an accident during their youth, leaving their mother, who had previously been a homemaker, deeply shaken. Despite her efforts to recover and return to work, she could only manage part-time hours, having previously dedicated herself to running the household. In response to the family's financial strain, Jack, then a college student, made the selfless decision to leave his studies and seek employment to support them. He declared, "I want Tom to have a proper college education," and tirelessly toiled without complaint. Thanks to Jack's sacrifices and some scholarships, Tom was able to attend college and secure a position at his current company. Jack beamed with pride when Tom and Sophia, his future wife, announced their engagement. At every opportunity, Tom expressed his profound gratitude to Jack, even shedding tears of appreciation at their wedding, declaring, "Without you, I wouldn't be standing here today." Emotions ran high as the room was moved by his heartfelt words. Jack never once displayed a hint of superiority towards Tom. He always approached life with generosity, warmth, and consideration towards both Tom and Sophia. However, after Sophia and Tom settled into their new home near Jack's family, Mia, Jack's wife, began making unsettling comments. She often remarked to Sophia, "You should be grateful to my husband." Jack's demanding job frequently kept him away on lengthy business trips and required him to work late into the night. On these occasions, Maya would invariably show up at Sophia and Tom's doorstep without warning. Living just a short walk away, Jack and Maya would bring their children over for dinner and baths, leaving Sophia to tend to them before returning home, ready for bed. Maya's demands extended to meal preferences, dictating, "I'm not in the mood for Western cuisine today, make something Japanese," or, "My child insists on having hamburger steak tonight," placing Sophia in a difficult position. Despite her discomfort, Sophia couldn't assert herself, mindful of the indebtedness owed to Jack. "Tom, remember, it's because of Jack that you're where you are today. Thanks to him, you went to college and landed a job at a prestigious company." Jack, on the other hand, struggled after high school and is still trying to climb the career ladder. If only he had gone to college, things would be different for him. "That's why we're in a new house while they're in an older one. You owe him for all he's done for us," Maya would often remind Tom, leaving him speechless and unable to refute her claims. Though he occasionally voiced concerns about her delegating too much household work to Sophia, given that Sophia works full-time while Maya is a homemaker, he hesitated to address the debt he owed to Jack. "Sorry, but it's because of my brother that I'm here today. Could you please try to work things out with Mia?" Tom pleaded with me. Reluctantly, I agreed to his request. However, our conciliatory approach only seemed to embolden Mia, leading to a surge in her demands. Her vexing behavior fell into two main categories. Firstly, she would frequently drop by our house to dine or bathe her children, and secondly, she often exploited my hospitality to enhance her image in front of our relatives. On the occasion of our relatives visiting, I'd like to prepare dinner for them and host them, she declared. Initially, I assumed I would also get the chance to socialize with my own family. Yet after I finished cooking, she promptly ushered me out, insisting, "Our relatives will be arriving soon, so it's best if you leave." Later, I overheard Mia and our relatives praising her culinary skills, crediting her with all the cooking. This scenario repeated itself each time Maya invited relatives over. I would cook, be sent home, foot the bill for ingredients, and Maya would take all the credit without even lifting a finger to help. Moreover, I was always tasked with arranging mid-year gifts and thank you presents for Jack's bosses and relatives who had supported him. These gifts were invariably sent under Maya's name, with her dictating instructions to me on what to do. At every family gathering, Jack's superiors and relatives would commend Mia for being such a devoted and accomplished wife, often telling me, You should learn from her, Sophia. I lost count of how many times I heard that refrain. I swallowed my frustration and calmly said, Tom and I are the ones preparing these gifts. We're willing to do it, but you need to cover the costs. We have our own obligations to send mid-year and year-end gifts, and it's becoming too expensive for us. Maya dismissed my concerns. That's nothing compared to what Jack sacrificed. He paid for your tuition and living expenses, Tom. Are you seriously complaining about the cost of a few gifts? She retorted. Turning to me, she accused, you know Jack gets praised because of the effort I put into these things. That's part of repaying Jack's kindness, isn't it? A wife who doesn't help her husband repay such a debt is the worst. Plus, since I keep track of the timing for these gifts, you won't forget them either. Mia often exploited Jack's favor towards Tom to impose her demands on us. We were responsible for all seasonal letters, New Year's cards, and mid-year and year-end gifts. Whenever anything went wrong, she would say, Tom owes his success to Jack. As if it were a cliché, she would also say things like, you should consult us if you want to take on such tasks, without offering any guidance. I felt humiliated as I tallied up the expenses for each month and every event. Then came the breaking point. Maya requested that I prepare a meal for about 20 of our relatives for a summer gathering at her house. Typically, our relatives gather at the home of a more senior family member during summer and New Year's events. However, Maya insisted, please come to our house. Her relatives were delighted, believing her to be a great cook and a considerate hostess, but she expected me to handle all the preparations. Tom had other commitments that day, leaving me to manage everything on my own. When I asked Mia how she planned to pay for the event, she said, we'd have to cover it ourselves. Preparing food and drinks for 20 people is a significant drain on our family finances. I suggested splitting the bill, but she flatly refused. Jack has endured so much hardship. He deserves at least this much, she insisted. I then suggested discussing the matter with Tom, but she exploded, I will not forgive you if you do that. Jack is busy with work right now. Are you repaying kindness with ingratitude? I was at my wit's end, but the dinner party was fast approaching. As the date neared, I noticed Mia showed no signs of urgency or preparation. With no other option, I began planning the event several days in advance. I also started making some behind-the-scenes arrangements. On the day of the dinner, I began preparations early in the morning, working tirelessly and managing to finish everything just a few hours before the guests were due to arrive, despite my exhaustion. After I finished all the preparations, Maya came to check on me. Maya, everything is ready. I believe the guests can arrive at any time now, I informed her. Glancing at the dishes on the table, Maya exclaimed, what are you doing? The main dish should be eel rice. You never mentioned eel rice, I replied, taken aback. You should have known that. This is so embarrassing. Our relatives are coming for the summer festival, and they'll think I can't even prepare eel rice. Order it right away. No, I've already prepared enough food for everyone, and the fish I bought is fresh. I'm not going to prepare a different dish now, I responded firmly. It has to be eel rice, Maya insisted, refusing to listen to my protests. She demanded we order a special batch for everyone, using our own money. When I asked her to cover the costs, she flatly refused. I couldn't take it any longer and voiced my frustrations. I reminded her that she always made me cook whenever she invited relatives over, that she came to our house daily when Jack was away, and that we handled all the mid-year and year-end gifts, including today's preparations. Maya countered with the usual talk about Jack's sacrifices. Fed up, I decided to reveal what I knew. Maya, you even had an affair with someone you met on a dating app, didn't you? You're a housewife, yet you leave so many responsibilities to me. I got curious and looked into it. Oh, so you know about that, she responded with a laugh, but I'm afraid you don't have any proof. Besides, I'm handling that situation just fine. By cooperating with me, you're essentially returning the favor. It's all part of the deal. Maya remained unfazed despite the revelation about her affair. Instead, she reiterated what Jack had done for Tom, saying, you will be repaying our family for the rest of your lives. At this point, I had reached my breaking point. I silently removed the food and started packing my belongings. I'm leaving. I will never return, I said firmly as I walked out. Maya yelled something about ordering eel rice, but I ignored her and left. A few minutes later, my phone began ringing repeatedly with calls from Mia. When I finally answered, she sounded panicked. What? What's going on? Is there something wrong? I asked her, feigning ignorance. I have so many inquiries. She continued frantically. I rearranged the dishes you made, and I ordered eel rice, paying for it with my own money. But none of the relatives showed up. It seems they know everything we discussed earlier. I couldn't stop laughing. I was also astonished that she had tried to salvage the situation by rearranging the food I had prepared. The reality was as follows. I couldn't tolerate Mia's arrogance any longer. Before she could criticize me further, I decided to talk to Jack directly, hoping he would offer some sound advice. I believed that Jack, unlike Mia, wouldn't hold their past support over my head. When I explained the situation to Jack, he seemed skeptical. He had always seen Mia as the perfect wife who made a good impression on her relatives. She presented herself as their ideal partner, preparing hot meals with a smile for Jack when he returned from work. Meals that often came from our kitchen. She arrogantly took large amounts of food from our house and missiled Jack, claiming they frequently invited me to dinner but didn't want to bother him with the details. She never mentioned my involvement in the gifts, always smiling and saying, "It's natural for a wife to handle these details to save her husband's face." Jack was always impressed, thinking, I married a wife who's too good for me. So when Jack heard my side of the story, he was speechless. Being a good man, he didn't accuse me of lying but believed there must be some misunderstanding between Maya and me. So, I pondered on how to present him with evidence. Would you allow me to gather some evidence? I asked Jack respectfully. With his permission, I decided to discreetly record Maya's conversations during her visits to our house, especially those where she displayed selfishness about food. Music. I captured a conversation where she insisted that we owed her obedience due to Jack's kindness, and I asked Jack to listen to it. When he heard it, he was speechless. Additionally, I informed Jack about an upcoming dinner party Maya and I were supposedly preparing together for her relatives. With his consent, I recorded everything from the moment I started preparing the meal to Maya's outbursts about using my money to order eel rice and her admission of the affair. I had arranged a video call with Jack and his relatives in advance, informing my own family about the scheduled time and date. It was during this call that Jack and his relatives finally learned the truth about Mia. After I departed, Jack's relatives confronted Mia over the call, expressing disbelief at the revelation that I had been handling all the year-end and mid-year gifts, taking advantage of Jack's kindness, and even engaging in adultery. Maya attempted to maintain her composure, but the weight of the evidence left her speechless. The majority of her relatives denounced her, severing ties with her and leaving Maya stunned. Jack, who had postponed his work to be present for the call, returned home and confronted Mia about the situation. "I am disappointed," he told me later. He revealed to Mia that her actions had caused distress for his beloved younger brother and his wife in his absence, and that her admission of an affair had shattered him. Maya broke down in tears, confessing that she had targeted me out of jealousy over our younger age and our nicer home. She claimed her affair stemmed from loneliness due to Jack's frequent absences and admitted to devising a plan to manipulate us after hearing Tom's heartfelt thank you letter to Jack at our wedding. I was infuriated by Mia's relentless harassment, but I also felt a pang of sympathy for Jack. I hadn't worked tirelessly for Tom's sake to create a sense of indebtedness, but rather out of love for my dear younger brother. My efforts were not fueled by the desire to hold them over his head in the future. I was proud to see Tom thriving in a reputable company, growing into a remarkable individual. As for Maya's disparaging remarks about my salary, I explained to her that it wasn't Tom's fault. It was simply my own lack of ambition. Further revelations surfaced about Maya's conduct. We learned that she had left their children unattended at home while she met her adulterous partner. Jack decided to pursue divorce proceedings, seeking custody of their children along with alimony. Maya vehemently opposed the idea of divorce, eventually agreeing to a slight reduction in alimony in exchange for a proper divorce and custody arrangements. Her affair had been uncovered by Jack, who also demanded full alimony. In the end, Maya moved back to her parents' home and took on multiple part-time and day jobs to meet the financial demands of double alimony and child support. A few months later, Maya appeared disheveled when she met me for a visit to see her child. Later, Jack apologized to us and covered the expenses for the ingredients and alcohol from the dinner party. He also promised to reimburse us for the meals Maya had consumed at our house and for the gifts she had made us prepare. But after discussing it, Tom and I declined the offer. I apologized to Jack because while this incident was meant to address Mia's wrongdoing, it also brought shame upon him and his family, I expressed, reflecting on the situation. I doubt Mia would have felt any remorse if we hadn't taken action, Jack chuckled. If anything, I am at fault for not noticing Mia's behavior until now, he added with a hint of sadness. Jack is currently juggling work responsibilities while caring for their child. We maintain regular contact with him, and on days when he's overwhelmed, we offer to look after his child at our home or invite him over for dinner. We've learned a valuable lesson about how some people can make you feel indebted even when they haven't done you any favors. Tom and I laughed together, reflecting on the experience.
My ruthless mother-in-law and sister-in-law poisoned my drink, leaving me for dead while they stole my luxury hotel and fortune. After months in a coma, I returned stronger. At the family gala, their faces froze in terror as I entered, alive and ready to unleash the revenge they never saw coming. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I thought I had everything I ever wanted in life. Growing up in a small town in Mexico, I never imagined that one day I'd be the owner of a chain of successful boutique hotels across California. Building my business wasn't easy. I worked tirelessly, often late into the night, with only my dreams to keep me going. But eventually I succeeded. My hotels became known for their warmth and impeccable service, attracting guests from all over the world. When I met Victor Morgan, I thought I'd found someone who understood me. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely proud of what I had achieved. Victor came from an old money family in Los Angeles. The Morgans had once been one of the most powerful names in California real estate, but their empire was faltering. Victor often talked about how he wanted to rebuild the family legacy, and I believed we could do it together. Our romance moved quickly. Within a year, we were married. Looking back, I realized I was blinded by love. I didn't notice the subtle red flags, the way Victor always deferred to his mother, Catherine, or how his sister, Fiona, seemed to treat me with thinly veiled disdain. At the time, I brushed it off as nerves or cultural differences. I thought I could win them over. After the wedding, everything changed. Catherine, a regal woman in her late 50s with a sharp tongue, made it clear that I was not what she had envisioned for her son. She often commented on my background, making snide remarks about how I didn't quite fit in with their circles. Fiona, in her early 30s and obsessed with her image, was no better. She constantly criticized my style, my accent, and even the way I ran my business. At first, Victor seemed to support me. He would tell me to ignore them and focus on our life together. But as time went on, I noticed a shift. He began siding with them in arguments, questioning my decisions, and pressuring me to spend more time at home instead of managing my hotels. It was subtle at first, but soon it became clear. They wanted me to give up my business entirely. One evening, Catherine invited us to dinner at the family estate. I remember sitting across the long dining table, surrounded by their opulent decor, as she made her intentions known. "Elena," she said, her tone deceptively sweet, "you've worked so hard. Don't you think it's time to let Victor take some of the burden? After all, a woman's true place is with her family." I was stunned. "Catherine, my business is my passion. I'm not giving it up." Victor chimed in, his voice unusually firm. "It's not about giving it up, Elena. It's about what's best for all of us. You can trust me to handle it." Their words left no doubt. They wanted control of everything I had built. They even suggested I transfer my assets to Victor for the family's benefit. I refused outright. That night, I realized I wasn't just fighting to keep my business. I was fighting to keep my independence. What I didn't know was how far they were willing to go. Over the next few weeks, things became more hostile. Catherine and Fiona spread rumors about me in their social circles, trying to damage my reputation. Victor became distant, often dismissing my concerns. I tried to hold everything together, but the pressure was mounting. Then, the unthinkable happened. It was another family dinner, the kind I had started to dread. Catherine insisted I try the special wine she'd had imported from France. I hesitated. It wasn't like me to drink much, especially around them. But Victor smiled and poured me a glass. "You'll love it," he said, his tone light but his eyes unreadable. I took a sip. Then another. That's the last thing I remember. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The doctor told me I had been in a coma for nearly 3 weeks. They said I had suffered from severe poisoning, but they couldn't determine the source. My mind raced. I wanted to believe it was an accident, but deep down I knew better. Victor was there when I woke up, but his concern felt hollow. He barely met my eyes as he explained what had happened. The doctors aren't sure how it happened, he said, his voice flat. Maybe it was something you ate. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I was too weak. Instead, I watched as he left the room, his phone already in his hand, texting someone as if I didn't exist. I knew then that I couldn't trust him, and I knew I had to uncover the truth. Recovering from the coma was the hardest thing I'd ever faced. My body was weak and my spirit even weaker. Lying in that hospital bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just bad luck or an accident. My instincts told me it was something much darker. But who would believe me? I couldn't prove anything, not yet. Victor visited a few more times during my recovery, but his demeanor was cold, almost resentful, as if my survival had inconvenienced him. Catherine and Fiona never came, which didn't surprise me. They had barely pretended to care about me when I was healthy, so why start now? When I finally returned home, everything fell off. My once beautiful home felt like a prison. Catherine had redecorated parts of the house without asking me, and Victor had moved some of my belongings into storage. It was as if they were erasing my presence, piece by piece. I needed answers. I hired a private investigator, someone discreet who wouldn't alert the Morgans to my suspicions. His name was Mark Daniels, and he came highly recommended. When I explained my situation, he didn't look surprised. "You're not the first person to deal with a family like this," he said. His confidence reassured me. Mark started digging into everything, the family's finances, their connections, and most importantly, the events leading up to my poisoning. I knew I couldn't trust anyone, so I kept my plans secret. Not even my closest friends knew what I was doing. While Mark investigated, I tried to regain control of my life. I returned to managing my hotels, but things were different. Several key staff members had abruptly resigned, and some of my best clients had been poached by competitors. It was clear someone was trying to destabilize my business. One evening, Mark called me with an update. "Elena, I've found something," he said. His voice was calm, but I could sense the urgency. We met at a small coffee shop, away from prying eyes. "What did you find?" I asked, barely able to contain my anxiety. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, financial records, and a USB drive. "Your husband and his family have been busy," he said. "Catherine and Fiona have been funneling money from their real estate deals into a private account. They're using your name and assets as collateral for their failing ventures." I felt a wave of anger and disbelief. "They're stealing from me?" "It gets worse," Mark said. "I also found footage from the night you were poisoned. The security cameras at the family estate captured Catherine instructing the staff to prepare your drink. One of the kitchen workers admitted that Fiona paid him to tamper with it." My stomach turned. It was one thing to suspect they hated me, but to see evidence of their betrayal, it was overwhelming. "Victor?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark hesitated. "He's not innocent, Elena. He knew what was happening. He didn't stop it and he didn't warn you." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, had stood by and let this happen. I couldn't let them get away with it. But I also knew I had to be smart. Storming into the family estate and confronting them would accomplish nothing. I needed a plan. I decided to play their game, but on my terms. I told Mark to keep digging while I began my own quiet campaign. I started showing up at the Morgan real estate offices, posing as a supportive wife interested in helping with their business. Catherine and Fiona were suspicious at first, but Victor vouched for me, saying I wanted to make amends after our recent tensions. What they didn't know was that I was collecting information. I paid close attention during meetings, overheard conversations, and accessed documents whenever I could. Over time, I began to piece together the full scope of their schemes. Catherine had been using fake property deals to inflate the company's value, fooling investors into pouring money into a sinking ship. Fiona had partnered with shady developers, skimming profits and laundering money through offshore accounts. And Victor, my Victor, had signed off on everything. One night, after a particularly tense meeting, I confronted Victor privately. "Do you even care about what they've done to me?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "Elena, you don't understand," he said, avoiding my gaze. "This is about family. You're either with us or against us." "Family?" I laughed bitterly. "You let them poison me, Victor. You stood by while they tried to destroy everything I've worked for. That's not family. That's betrayal." He didn't respond. His silence spoke louder than any words could. I left that conversation more determined than ever. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting to expose the truth. Mark and I gathered everything we needed: financial records, witness statements, and the security footage from the night of the poisoning. The pieces were falling into place, but I knew I couldn't stop there. I needed a public platform, a way to reveal the Morgans' corruption to the world. As I gathered evidence against the Morgans, the weight of their betrayal grew heavier. Every piece of information Mark uncovered was another blow to my trust, my love, and my belief in the life I thought I had. But it also fueled my determination to fight back. This wasn't just about reclaiming my assets or my business. It was about taking back my dignity and ensuring they could never hurt anyone else. My opportunity came sooner than I expected. The Morgans were planning a high-profile charity gala, a flashy event designed to restore their tarnished reputation and attract new investors. Catherine was boasting about it at every meeting, calling it the revival of the Morgan legacy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I decided the gala would be my stage. If I was going to expose them, I wanted the whole world to see their fall. I worked with Mark to finalize our evidence: forged contracts, fraudulent property deals, offshore accounts, and, most damning of all, the footage of Catherine and Fiona's poisoning scheme. Every document, every statement was meticulously organized. Meanwhile, I continued my double life, pretending to support the Morgans while secretly working against them. It wasn't easy. Catherine's sharp eyes always seemed to linger on me a little too long, as if she suspected something. Fiona's snide remarks had grown harsher, and Victor, well, he had become a stranger. He avoided me at home, burying himself in work or disappearing for hours without explanation. I stopped caring. Whatever love I'd once felt for him was gone. As the gala approached, I began reaching out to key players in their world: investors, journalists, and even a few of their employees who had been coerced into silence. Many were hesitant to speak out, fearing retaliation, but I promised them anonymity and protection. Slowly, people started to come forward, sharing their stories of manipulation and deceit. The night of the gala finally arrived. The Morgans had spared no expense, transforming their estate into a glittering spectacle of wealth and opulence. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits filled the grand hall, sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries. Catherine and Fiona worked the room, their polished smiles hiding the rot beneath. Victor stood off to the side, looking as hollow as I felt. I waited until the event was in full swing before making my move. As Catherine stood on stage, delivering a speech about the resilience and vision of the Morgan family, I stepped forward. "Excuse me, Catherine," I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the crowd. "I think it's time we share the real story of the Morgan legacy." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Catherine's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of panic. Fiona's hand tightened around her glass, and Victor, he just stared at me, his face unreadable. "I've spent the past few months uncovering the truth about this family," I continued. "What you see here tonight, the luxury, the wealth, it's built on lies, fraud, and betrayal." I turned to the screen behind me, where Mark had set up a projector. One by one, the evidence played out for the entire room to see. Fake property deals, forged signatures, offshore accounts, it was all there. Gasps and murmurs filled the air as the guests realized the extent of the Morgans' corruption. But it wasn't over yet. And if that wasn't enough, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest, this family also tried to kill me. I played the footage from the night of my poisoning. Catherine's voice echoed through the hall as she gave instructions to the staff, and Fiona's smirk was unmistakable as she handed over the tampered bottle of wine. The crowd's shock turned to outrage. Catherine stormed forward, her composure shattered. "You have no proof. This is all fabricated," she screamed, but her voice lacked conviction. "I think the authorities will decide that," I said, stepping aside as police officers entered the room. Mark had coordinated with them to be on standby, and they wasted no time taking Catherine and Fiona into custody. Victor tried to intervene, but an officer stopped him. "Elena," he said, his voice pleading for the first time. "You don't have to do this." I met his gaze, feeling a strange mix of pity and contempt. "You made your choice, Victor. Now I'm making mine." As they led the Morgans away, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in months, I was free. But the night wasn't over. I turned back to the stunned guests. This isn't just my story. It's a reminder that power and greed can destroy lives. But standing up for the truth, that's what rebuilds them. The applause that followed was a blur. All I could feel was the weight lifting off my shoulders. The Morgans had taken so much from me, but they hadn't won. The morning after the gala, I woke up to a flood of messages and calls. News outlets were ablaze with headlines about the Morgans' downfall. The footage from the gala had gone viral, and people were already labeling it one of the biggest scandals in California's business history. Catherine and Fiona were in custody, charged with fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Victor, too, was under investigation, though his involvement seemed more passive. It didn't matter. To me, they were all guilty. The legal battle that followed was grueling. I testified against them, recounting every betrayal, every calculated move they had made to destroy me. It wasn't easy reliving those moments in court, but it was necessary. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for justice. As the trial unfolded, more victims of the Morgans came forward. Investors who had been cheated, employees who had been threatened, and even former friends they had used and discarded. The weight of evidence was overwhelming. The court found Catherine and Fiona guilty on all charges, sentencing them to lengthy prison terms. Victor's involvement was less direct, but he didn't escape unscathed. He lost his position in the company, his reputation was destroyed, and he was ordered to pay significant restitution to the victims. For me, the court's decision was bittersweet. I had won, yes, but it came at a cost. My trust in people had been shattered, and the scars of their betrayal would take time to heal. Still, I knew I couldn't dwell on the pain. I had a life to rebuild. The court also ruled that the Morgans' remaining assets, including their properties and shares in the company, would be liquidated to compensate for the damages they had caused. A significant portion of these funds was awarded to me as restitution for the losses I had suffered. It was poetic justice. The empire they had tried to take from me was now mine to rebuild. But money wasn't my only focus. I knew I wanted to turn this experience into something meaningful, something that could help others. I used part of the settlement to establish a foundation for women who had faced betrayal and abuse, providing them with legal and financial support to rebuild their lives. I called it the Resilience Project. My hotels, which had been struggling during the ordeal, became my sanctuary. I poured my energy into revitalizing them, creating spaces that celebrated community and strength. Guests often approached me, saying they had read my story and found inspiration in my journey. It was humbling, and it reminded me why I had fought so hard to begin with. One day, as I stood in the lobby of my flagship hotel in Los Angeles, a young woman approached me. She was hesitant at first, but eventually, she said, "Your story gave me the courage to leave a toxic situation." "Thank you." Her words stayed with me, a reminder that my pain hadn't been in vain. As for Victor, he tried reaching out to me a few times, sending letters that alternated between apologies and excuses. I never responded. I had nothing more to say to him. He was a part of my past, and I was focused on my future. Catherine and Fiona's downfall was swift and unforgiving. Their names became synonymous with greed and corruption, and the once proud Morgan family faded into obscurity. I didn't revel in their suffering, but I didn't pity them either. They had made their choices, and now they were paying the price. My greatest victory wasn't the money or the public vindication. It was reclaiming my sense of self. For so long, I had allowed their schemes to consume me, but now I was free. I had survived, I had fought back, and I had won. Years later, as I reflect on everything that happened, I realize how much I've grown. The betrayal that nearly broke me became the catalyst for my transformation. I'm stronger now, not because of what they did to me, but because of how I chose to respond. This journey taught me an important lesson. Resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving, even in the face of unimaginable challenges. And as I continue to build my life, I carry that lesson with me, knowing that no matter what comes my way, I have the strength to overcome it. This is my story. It's not just about betrayal or revenge. It's about empowerment, redemption, and the unbreakable spirit of a woman who refused to be defeated. My greedy husband demanded that I give him my dream car and all my savings to clear his gambling debts. When I refused, he slapped me hard and yelled, "How dare you disobey my orders?" My mother-in-law also wanted me kicked out of the house. Secretly, I created a revenge plan, and the very next day, when they woke up, a horrific surprise awaited them. My name is Eleanor Carter, and there was a time when I thought my life was perfect. I had a loving husband, a beautiful home, and dreams for a future filled with happiness. But life has a way of pulling back the curtains, revealing truths you never wanted to see. I met Henry Carter during my last year at university. He was everything I thought I wanted: charming, attentive, and so full of promises. He told me I was the love of his life, the woman he had been waiting for. At 26, I believed him with my whole heart. We got married quickly, swept up in the whirlwind of romance, and I truly thought I had found my happily ever after. But things began to change the moment we moved into Henry's family home in Dallas. It wasn't my choice to live there, but Henry insisted. He said it was temporary, just until we saved up enough to buy a place of our own. What I didn't know was that his mother, Sophia Carter, ruled that house, and Henry, like a tyrant. Sophia was the kind of woman who always needed to be in control. She was in her mid-50s, an experienced real estate agent with a sharp tongue and an even sharper temper. From the start, she made it clear she didn't think I was good enough for her son. She criticized everything: my clothes, my cooking, even the way I spoke. "Henry deserves better," she'd say with a thin smile, as if I weren't even in the room. At first, I tried to be polite. I told myself it was just her way, that she'd warm up to me eventually. But she never did. Instead, her insults grew harsher, and her manipulation more obvious. She'd corner Henry whenever I wasn't around, filling his head with doubts about me. "Eleanor's too young to understand responsibility," she'd say. "She's holding you back." What hurt the most was how Henry reacted. He never stood up for me. Not once. Whenever Sophia said something cruel, he'd look away, pretending not to hear. And when I confronted him about it, he'd shrug and say, "That's just how Mom is. Don't take it personally." But it was personal. Every word she said, every glare she threw my way, cut me deeper than I cared to admit. Still, I held on. I told myself things would get better. I loved Henry, and I believed that love would be enough to get us through. I was wrong. The breaking point came about 2 years into our marriage. Henry had always been a bit careless with money, but I didn't realize just how bad things had gotten. One night, he came home looking pale and nervous. I knew something was wrong. "We need to talk," he said, avoiding my eyes. He told me he had made some bad decisions, gambling, borrowing money from people he shouldn't have, and now he was in serious trouble. He owed tens of thousands of dollars, and the creditors were demanding payment. "I need your help, Eleanor," he said. "I'm asking you to sell your car and give me your savings. It's the only way we can fix this." I stared at him in disbelief. My car wasn't just a car, it was my dream, something I had worked so hard for. And my savings? That was supposed to be for our future, for the home we wanted to buy. How could he even ask me to give it all up to clean up his mess? "No," I said firmly. "I won't do it. I've already sacrificed so much, Henry." You need to take responsibility for your own actions." His face darkened. I'd never seen him like that before. "Don't you dare talk to me like that," he snapped. "I'm your husband. You're supposed to support me." "Support you?" I shot back. "All I've done is support you. But this is too much. You've let your mother walk all over me, and now you want me to fix your mistakes?" "No, Henry. I won't." And then it happened. He slapped me. Hard. The force of it knocked me back a step, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The shock, the pain, it was overwhelming. He didn't even apologize. He just stood there, his face a mix of anger and shame. I locked myself in the bathroom that night, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My cheek was red and swollen, but that wasn't what hurt the most. It was the betrayal, the realization that the man I thought I loved had become a stranger. A coward. Something inside me broke that night, but in its place, something new began to grow. A fire, a determination I didn't know I had. I wasn't going to let Henry or his mother destroy me. I was done being their victim. I made a decision right then and there. I would take back control of my life, and I would make them pay for everything they had done to me. After that night, something shifted in me. I was no longer the same Eleanor Carter who had tiptoed around Sylvia's insults or begged Henry for respect. I realized I couldn't count on anyone else to stand up for me. If I wanted my life back, I had to fight for it myself. And fight I would. In the days that followed, I acted like everything was normal. Henry's slap had shaken me to my core, but I didn't let him see that. He thought I'd forgiven him, or maybe he didn't care. Either way, I knew that if I wanted to get out of this mess, I had to play my cards carefully. The last thing I needed was for him or Sylvia to suspect what I was planning. I started small, gathering evidence piece by piece. Sylvia had always been boastful about her success in real estate. She loved to brag about her deals and connections, especially during her lavish dinner parties. What she didn't realize was how much she revealed when she was trying to impress her guests. One evening, while serving dessert, I overheard her talking about creative accounting tricks she used to avoid paying taxes on her commissions. "The IRS won't notice if you know how to shuffle things around," she said with a smirk, her wine glass in hand. I pretended not to hear, but my mind was racing. If Sylvia was involved in tax fraud, there had to be evidence somewhere. I started paying close attention to her office. Sylvia had a habit of leaving her paperwork scattered across her desk, and I made mental notes whenever I could. One day, while she was out at a showing, I managed to sneak into her office and take pictures of some of the documents. They didn't make much sense to me at the time, numbers and codes scribbled in margins, but I figured they'd be useful later. Meanwhile, I started documenting Henry's behavior. I knew it wasn't enough to expose Sylvia. I needed to show the world who Henry really was. Whenever he yelled or made threats, I recorded him on my phone. I took pictures of the bruises he left and saved copies of text messages where he blamed me for his problems. It was painful to relive those moments, but I knew they would be my armor when the time came to fight. I couldn't do this alone, though. That's when I reached out to Detective Marcus Hill. I had met him a few years ago through a friend, and I remembered him as someone who genuinely cared about justice. It was terrifying to tell him everything, the abuse, the fraud, the betrayal, but he listened patiently, taking notes as I poured my heart out. "You're doing the right thing, Eleanor," Marcus said, his voice steady. "But you need to be careful. People like Sylvia don't go down without a fight."
"I know," I said.
But I'm not scared of her anymore. With Marcus's guidance, I started building my case. He explained how we could use the evidence I'd gathered to trigger an investigation into Sylvia's business. He also encouraged me to file for divorce and press charges against Henry for domestic violence. It felt overwhelming at first, like I was standing at the base of a mountain I didn't know how to climb. But Marcus reminded me that I wasn't alone. "Step by step, Eleanor," he said. "We'll take them down together." The first step was leaking Sylvia's tax fraud to the authorities. I sent the photos of her documents to the IRS anonymously, along with a detailed letter explaining her schemes. I made sure to include just enough information to make them curious without revealing that I was the source. I didn't want Sylvia to suspect me, at least not yet. Next, I filed for divorce. That conversation with Henry was one of the hardest moments of my life. He looked at me with a mix of anger and disbelief as I handed him the papers. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice rising. "You're my wife. We're supposed to fix this together." "Fix this?" I said, my voice shaking. "You think I can fix this after everything you've done? You hit me, Henry. You let your mother treat me like dirt. You've lied, you've gambled, and you've ruined everything we had. I'm done." His response was cold and venomous. "You'll regret this, Eleanor. You think you're better than me? Let's see how far you get without me." I walked away from that conversation feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt free. But I wasn't done yet. Sylvia still had no idea what was coming, and I intended to keep it that way. While the IRS investigation unfolded, I worked closely with Marcus to ensure my evidence against Henry was solid. I wanted the world to see him for who he really was, a selfish, abusive man who didn't deserve the power he thought he had over me. I didn't know how long it would take for everything to come to light, but I was willing to wait. I had spent years suffering in silence, and I was done playing the victim. This time, I was in control. And I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to win. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. I knew that taking down Sylvia and Henry wouldn't happen overnight, but every piece of evidence I gathered brought me closer to my goal. The IRS had begun their investigation into Sylvia's real estate fraud, and though I didn't know the details, I could sense the tension growing in the house. Sylvia was on edge, snapping at everyone and spending hours locked in her office. She didn't know the source of the leak, but her paranoia was palpable. I played my role perfectly, acting as though I had no idea what was going on. To her, I was still the quiet, unremarkable daughter-in-law she could ignore. She had no idea that I was the one who had set everything in motion. As for Henry, he was unraveling faster than I expected. The divorce papers had shaken him, but the realization that I wasn't backing down seemed to hit him even harder. He tried every tactic to manipulate me, pleading, blaming, even threatening, but I refused to engage. Every conversation we had was another opportunity for me to gather evidence. One evening, Henry cornered me in the kitchen. His eyes were bloodshot, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You're ruining my life, Eleanor," he slurred. "Do you even care what you're doing to this family?" I looked him in the eye, my voice steady. "This family ruined itself, Henry. You and your mother made sure of that." He lunged toward me, his face twisted with anger, but I held my ground. I had learned not to fear him anymore. Instead, I calmly turned on my phone's recorder in my pocket, making sure to capture every word he said. "You think you're so clever," he sneered. "But you'll see. I'll make sure you regret this." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. His threats were just empty words, and soon, he'd realized just how powerless he really was. The turning point came a week later. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book, when Sylvia stormed in, her face red with anger. She held a stack of papers in her hand, documents from the IRS. "What is this?" she demanded, waving the papers at me. "Do you know anything about this, Eleanor?" I looked up, feigning confusion. "About what?" "This investigation," she shouted. "Someone reported my business. They're accusing me of fraud." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my tone calm. "Why would I know anything about that, Sylvia? I'm not involved in your business." She glared at me, her suspicion obvious, but she couldn't prove anything. Not yet, anyway. I could feel the cracks in her composure, the fear creeping in. It was only a matter of time before her empire came crashing down. Meanwhile, Marcus kept me updated on the progress of the case against Henry. With the recordings, photos, and messages I had provided, we built a strong case for domestic violence and financial abuse. When the time was right, Marcus helped me file an official complaint, ensuring that Henry would be held accountable for his actions. The fallout was swift and brutal. News of Sylvia's fraud spread quickly, tarnishing her reputation in the real estate world. Her clients began pulling out of deals, and her business started to collapse under the weight of the investigation. The IRS seized her accounts, freezing her assets while they conducted their audit. For a woman who had built her life on power and control, it was the ultimate humiliation. Henry wasn't spared either. When I pressed charges against him, it became public knowledge. People who had once admired him as a successful accountant now saw him for what he truly was, a coward who preyed on those he claimed to love. His employer fired him, and his gambling debts continued to pile up, leaving him desperate and alone. But Sophia wasn't ready to go down without a fight. In a last-ditch effort to save herself, she tried to frame me for her crimes. She claimed that I had tampered with her records, planting evidence to make her look guilty. It was a bold move, but I was ready for it. Marcus helped me gather proof that I had no access to her accounts or records beyond what I had documented from her own negligence. When her lies fell apart under scrutiny, it only solidified her guilt. The court issued a warrant for her arrest, and Sophia was taken into custody, her once proud demeanor replaced with fear and shame. Henry, left with nothing, came crawling back to me. He showed up at my apartment one evening, his clothes wrinkled and his face hollow. "Eleanor," he said, his voice trembling, "I've lost everything. Please, I need your help." I stood in the doorway, looking at the man I had once loved. He was a shadow of himself, broken and desperate. But I felt no sympathy for him. He had chosen this path, and he had no one to blame but himself. "You made your choices, Henry," I said coldly. "And now you have to live with them. I won't let you drag me down with you." As I closed the door in his face, I felt a sense of closure. For the first time in years, I was free. When I closed the door on Henry that night, it felt like closing a chapter of my life I never wanted to revisit. For years, I had lived in fear, humiliation, and heartbreak, but those chains had finally broken. The Eleanor Carter, who once tiptoed around Sylvia's wrath and Henry's indifference, no longer existed. I was free, truly free for the first time. But my story didn't end there. Justice still needed to take its course, and I wasn't about to let Sophia or Henry escape the consequences of their actions. Sylvia's trial was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Sitting in that courtroom, I watched as the evidence I had painstakingly gathered was laid out piece by piece. The documents, the testimonies, and the transactions, it all painted a damning picture of her fraud and corruption. Sophia, of course, tried to play the victim. "This is a misunderstanding," she pleaded, her voice trembling with feigned innocence. "I've always conducted my business with integrity." The prosecutor wasn't having it. He presented the evidence so clearly, so meticulously, that even Sylvia's high-priced lawyer couldn't refute it. When the verdict came, guilty on multiple counts of tax fraud and embezzlement, there was no outburst, no dramatic scene. Sophia simply slumped in her chair, defeated. She was sentenced to several years in prison, and her empire crumbled to dust. Henry's downfall was just as inevitable. The charges of domestic violence and financial abuse, coupled with his gambling debts, left him with no defense. His reputation was in tatters, and his friends had long abandoned him. When the judge handed down the ruling, a restraining order and mandatory counseling sessions, Henry didn't even look at me. He stared at the floor, a broken man stripped of his facade. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a sense of triumph I couldn't put into words. I had stood up to the people who had tried to destroy me, and I had won. But it wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life. The months that followed were a time of rebuilding and rediscovery. I moved into a cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a far cry from the oppressive luxury of the Carter mansion. I resumed teaching, pouring my energy into my students and finding joy in the small, everyday victories. My friend Marcus Hill, the detective who had helped me through it all, became a regular part of my life. His steady presence and encouragement reminded me that not everyone in this world is out to hurt you. One day, while tidying up my apartment, I stumbled upon an old journal I had kept before marrying Henry. Flipping through the pages, I saw a list of dreams I had written down: travel to Italy, start a garden, adopt a rescue dog. I smiled, realizing how far I had strayed from the person I once was. But now it was time to find her again. With the court proceedings behind me, I decided to treat myself to something I had long denied myself: a new car. Not just any car, but one I truly loved. It was my way of reclaiming the part of me Henry had tried to take. Driving down the open road in that shiny red convertible felt like freedom in its purest form. I also started therapy, something I had once dismissed as unnecessary. But talking to someone about the pain and trauma I had endured helped me more than I expected. My therapist, a kind and insightful woman named Dr. Lawson, helped me process my feelings and let go of the anger that had consumed me for so long. But the biggest change came in the form of an unexpected opportunity. Marcus introduced me to a nonprofit organization that supported women escaping abusive relationships. They were looking for a speaker, someone who could share their story and inspire others. At first, I hesitated. The thought of standing in front of strangers and bearing my soul terrified me. But Marcus reminded me of how far I had come, how much strength I had found within myself. So I agreed. My first speech was nerve-wracking, but as I stood on that stage, looking into the faces of women who had walked similar paths, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. Sharing my story wasn't just about helping others, it was about healing myself. Today, I look back on those years with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for the pain I endured, but gratitude for the lessons it taught me. Sylvia and Henry tried to break me, but instead, they made me stronger. They forced me to find a resilience I didn't know I had, to fight for a future I never thought I could have. I still have scars, some visible, some not, but they're a reminder of how far I've come. I'm no longer Eleanor Carter, the quiet, unassuming wife. I'm Eleanor, a survivor, an advocate, and a woman who reclaimed her life against all odds. And as I sit here, pen in hand, writing the final words of my story, I can't help but smile. Because this isn't the end, it's just the beginning. My greedy mother-in-law planned to steal my $20 million mansion by forging my signature. When I exposed her, she attacked me with a hockey stick, leaving me badly injured. My husband then locked me in a dark basement, leaving me alone to die. But they were unaware of my plans for revenge. The very next day, I returned with a shocking surprise they never saw coming. My name is Olivia. I'm 26 years old, and not too long ago, I thought I had the perfect life. It all started when I met Daniel at a charity gala. He was everything I had ever dreamed of: charming, successful, and incredibly handsome. He was 10 years older than me, in his mid-30s, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that made people stop and listen. We hit it off instantly. He made me feel special, like I was the only woman in the room. At that time, I had no idea how drastically my life would change because of him. Looking back now, I can't believe how naive I was, but back then, I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale. Daniel came from a wealthy family and lived in a sprawling estate in the suburbs. I remember the first time he brought me there, I was awestruck. It was like stepping into a movie set, with grand chandeliers, marble floors, and a lush garden that seemed to go on forever. But it wasn't just the mansion that captivated me. It was Daniel's mother, Evelyn. Evelyn was a polished woman in her 50s, always dressed impeccably. She seemed so kind and welcoming at first, almost like she was eager to have me in their family. "You're perfect for Daniel," she told me one evening, her voice smooth and warm. I was flattered. She had this way of making you feel like you were special. But there was something about her smile that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It felt calculated, like she was always 2 steps ahead of everyone. My parents passed away when I was young, leaving me a substantial inheritance, including a $20 million mansion. I had grown up hearing how fortunate I was, but I rarely thought about it. My life wasn't defined by wealth. It was defined by the people I loved. So when Daniel proposed to me after just 6 months of dating, I said yes, without hesitation. I believed I had found my happily ever after. Our wedding was a grand affair, straight out of a fairy tale. Evelyn spared no expense. "Nothing but the best for my new daughter," she told me, beaming. At the time, I thought she genuinely cared for me. But as the weeks turned into months, subtle changes started happening. Evelyn was always around, offering advice about my finances and my inherited mansion. You don't need to worry about these things, she'd say. Daniel and I will handle everything. At first, I thought she was just being helpful. I trusted her and Daniel completely. Looking back, the first red flag should have been when Daniel convinced me to transfer the deed of my mansion temporarily to simplify some legal formalities. He explained it so smoothly and Evelyn chimed in, saying it was just a precaution. Trust me, sweetheart, Daniel said, flashing that disarming smile of his. I didn't even hesitate. I signed the papers. Life felt too good to be true. But slowly, I started noticing cracks in the perfect picture. Daniel became less attentive, often consumed with work emergencies. Evelyn's warm demeanor began to feel overbearing, like she was always watching, always in control. One evening, I overheard Evelyn and Daniel talking in hushed tones in the study. I couldn't make out the details, but their voices sounded tense, almost conspiratorial. When I asked Daniel about it later, he brushed it off. Business, nothing for you to worry about, he said, giving me a quick kiss before changing the subject. I tried to shake off my unease, convincing myself that I was imagining things. After all, Daniel loved me, didn't he? Evelyn treated me like family, or so I thought. But the doubts kept creeping in. One day, while cleaning up in the study, I stumbled upon a folder left on Daniel's desk. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside were copies of documents with my signature on them, documents I didn't remember signing. They detailed the transfer of my mansion to Daniel and Evelyn. My stomach churned as I realized what this meant. They had forged my signature. I felt a chill run down my spine. Everything started to make sense. The constant meddling, the sudden interest in my finances, and Daniel's recent distance. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right there in front of me. That night, I confronted Daniel. What is this? I asked, holding up the documents. His expression darkened, and for the first time, I saw a side of him I didn't recognize. He didn't deny it. Instead, he called Evelyn into the room. She walked in calmly, her face unreadable, as if she had been expecting this. Olivia, you don't understand how complicated this is, Evelyn said, her voice cold and sharp. This is what's best for everyone. Best for who? I demanded, my voice shaking. You're stealing from me. Daniel tried to grab the papers, but I held them tight. His charm was gone, replaced by something cruel. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said, his tone low and threatening. I couldn't believe what was happening. The man I had trusted, the man I loved, was working with his mother to betray me. The fairy tale I had believed in was unraveling before my eyes. And this was just the beginning. After confronting Daniel and Evelyn that night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, clutching the papers I had discovered, my heart racing with fear and anger. How could I have been so blind? The man I loved and the woman I trusted like a second mother were plotting against me. The next morning, I decided to confront them again. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Daniel, I said, finding him in the living room, we need to talk.
Now.
He barely looked up from his phone. Not now, Olivia. I'm busy. I wouldn't let him brush me off. Busy stealing from me? I snapped, throwing the papers onto the coffee table. He froze for a moment, then slowly turned to face me. You're being dramatic, he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me, I demanded. Why is my signature on documents I never signed? Why are you trying to take my mansion? Before he could respond, Evelyn walked in. She looked at the papers on the table, then at me, her face composed, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Olivia, she said, her tone patronizing, you're upset. Let's not blow this out of proportion. Blow this out of proportion? I repeated, my voice rising. You forged my signature. You're trying to steal everything I have. Evelyn didn't flinch. She picked up the papers and examined them, then placed them back on the table. You don't understand how difficult it is to manage something like this, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Daniel and I were trying to protect you. Protect me? I felt my anger boil over. From what? My own inheritance. Daniel stepped in then, his voice low and firm. "You're being emotional, Olivia. You don't see the bigger picture." I stared at him in disbelief. This was the man I married, the man I thought I would spend my life with, and he was standing there, calmly justifying his betrayal. "You're both disgusting," I said, my voice trembling. "I want you out of my house."
Now.
Evelyn let out a sharp laugh, her composure finally cracking. "Your house?" she said, her eyes narrowing. "Sweetheart, it hasn't been yours for a while." That's when it hit me. The deed transfer. They already had control of the mansion. I had handed it to them, blindly trusting their lies. I felt a wave of panic rising in my chest. "You're not taking this from me," I said, my voice shaking but determined. Daniel moved toward me then, his face dark with anger. "You don't get to make that decision anymore," he said. "You're in over your head, Olivia." The tension in the room was suffocating. I didn't know what they were capable of, and for the first time, I felt truly unsafe in my own home. I decided to leave the room, needing to think, to plan my next move. But Evelyn wasn't done. As I turned to go, she grabbed a hockey stick that was leaning against the wall, a decorative piece, or so I thought, and swung it at me. I barely had time to react. The blow struck my side, sending me to the floor. Pain shot through my body as I lay there, gasping for breath. Evelyn stood over me, her expression cold and unfeeling. "You should have stayed quiet," she said, her voice as sharp as the pain radiating through me. Daniel grabbed the hockey stick from her, his face a mix of anger and panic. "That's enough," he said, though he didn't seem concerned for me, only worried about what might happen next. They carried me to the basement, where they locked me in. The cold, damp air pressed against my skin, and the darkness was suffocating. I was alone, hurt, and terrified. I had no idea what they planned to do next. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. It was hard to tell in the dark. My body ached from Evelyn's attack, and my mind raced with thoughts of escape. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them take everything from me. I began to search the basement for anything I could use to free myself. My hands trembled as I felt along the walls, hoping for a way out. Then, by some miracle, I found an old, rusted nail. It wasn't much, but it was something. Using the nail, I began to work on the lock. It was slow, grueling work, and my injured body screamed in protest. But I refused to give up. I had to get out of there. I had to fight back. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the lock clicked open. I pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding. I was free, but I wasn't safe yet. I needed a plan. I slipped into the study and grabbed my phone, which they had carelessly left behind. My hands trembled as I began recording a video, documenting my injuries and recounting what they had done to me. If I was going to take them down, I needed evidence. That night, I escaped the mansion. But I wasn't running away. I was preparing for the fight of my life. Escaping from that basement felt like a small victory, but I knew the real battle was just beginning. As I stumbled into the cool night air, clutching my phone with my recorded evidence, I realized the magnitude of what lay ahead. Evelyn and Daniel were ruthless, and they had already stripped me of my mansion. But they hadn't broken me. Not yet. I spent the first night at a nearby motel, nursing my injuries and trying to gather my thoughts. Every movement was painful, a reminder of Evelyn's attack, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the betrayal I felt. I couldn't let them get away with this. I wouldn't. The next morning, I reviewed the video I had recorded. My face was bruised, my voice shaky as I recounted what they had done. It was raw and real, and I knew it was powerful. But I needed more. I couldn't risk going to the authorities without solid evidence. Daniel and Evelyn had the resources to twist the narrative in their favor. I needed a plan, one that would expose them completely. For days, I stayed under the radar, using the time to piece together my next steps. I combed through emails, financial records, and anything I could find that tied them to the forgery and theft. I had kept some documents hidden away in a secure folder on my laptop, and thankfully, they hadn't discovered it. Those documents, combined with my video, began to form a clear picture of their scheme. While I worked, I uploaded the video to a private server. I couldn't release it just yet. I needed to time it perfectly. But knowing I had it ready to go gave me a sense of control. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Then came the hardest part, confronting my own fear. Daniel and Evelyn had taken everything from me, and part of me wanted to disappear, to leave it all behind and start over. But I couldn't. This wasn't just about me, it was about justice. If I let them win, they would continue to prey on others, using their wealth and power to destroy lives. I had to stop them. One night, as I sat in the dim light of my motel room, an idea came to me. It was risky, but it could work. I would lure them back to the mansion, the very place they had stolen from me, and trap them in their own web of lies. If I played my cards right, the authorities would catch them red-handed. I reached out to Daniel, pretending to be remorseful. "I'm sorry for everything," I wrote in a carefully worded text. I overreacted.
Can we talk?
"I want to make things right." It didn't take long for him to respond. "We'll talk, but at the house. Tomorrow."
Perfect.
The next day, I returned to the mansion for the first time since my escape. My heart pounded as I walked through the familiar doors, now tainted with memories of betrayal. Daniel and Evelyn were waiting for me in the living room, their expressions guarded. "Olivia," Evelyn said, her voice as smooth as ever. "I'm glad you've come to your senses." I forced a smile, keeping my fear and anger buried deep. "I just want to move on," I said, my voice steady. "Let's figure this out." They seemed to relax, believing they had won. But what they didn't know was that I had already set my plan in motion. Hidden cameras were strategically placed around the house, recording every word, every move. I had also tipped off the police, providing them with enough evidence to take my claims seriously. They were waiting just outside, ready to act when the moment was right. As the conversation continued, I pressed them about the documents. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice trembling just enough to seem genuine. "Why betray me like this?" Evelyn smirked, a cruel glint in her eyes. "You wouldn't understand, Olivia," she said. "It's about survival. You were too naive to handle something as valuable as that mansion. We simply took control." Daniel didn't even try to deny it. "It's business, Olivia. Don't take it personally." I felt my anger rise, but I kept my composure. "And the forgery? Locking me in the basement? Was that business too?" Evelyn's smirk faltered, but before she could respond, I stood up. "You won't get away with this," I said, my voice firm. Daniel laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "What are you going to do, Olivia? Run to the police? They won't believe you." At that moment, the front door burst open, and the police swarmed in. Evelyn's face twisted in shock, and Daniel froze, his arrogance replaced with panic. The officers quickly apprehended them, and I watched as the two people who had tried to destroy me were finally held accountable. As they were led away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But I wasn't finished yet. I had one more thing to do. I uploaded the video. The moment I uploaded the video, I felt a rush of emotions, fear, relief, and a strange sense of power. The world needed to see the truth about Daniel and Evelyn to understand the nightmare I had endured. Within hours, the video began to spread online. People were horrified by the bruises on my face, the anguish in my voice, and the shocking story of betrayal and abuse. Comments of support poured in from strangers, their outrage igniting a wildfire of attention. News outlets picked up the story, and within days, my life was no longer just mine. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't a victim silenced in the dark. I was a woman fighting back. Meanwhile, the police investigation moved quickly. The evidence I had collected, combined with the footage from the cameras in the mansion, left no room for doubt. Evelyn's forgery, Daniel's complicity, and their coordinated efforts to steal my inheritance were laid bare for everyone to see. They tried to deny it at first, but the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. They couldn't talk their way out of this one. One of the most surreal moments came when I had to sit across from them in court. Daniel and Evelyn, once so powerful and untouchable, now looked small and defeated. Evelyn glared at me with icy hatred, while Daniel refused to meet my eyes. I stood tall, refusing to let their presence intimidate me. When I was called to testify, I spoke from the heart. I recounted everything: how I fell in love with Daniel, how Evelyn manipulated me, and how their betrayal shattered my trust. I told the court about the night Evelyn attacked me, about being locked in the basement, and about my escape. My voice wavered at times, but I didn't let my fear stop me. This was my chance to take back control, to show them that I wasn't the naive woman they thought I was. The turning point came when the recordings I had made were played in court. Evelyn's smug confession, Daniel's cold indifference, and their casual discussion of their schemes were impossible to ignore. The room was silent as the truth played out in their own words. In the end, the judge didn't hesitate. Both Evelyn and Daniel were found guilty on multiple charges, including forgery, assault, and unlawful imprisonment. Evelyn received the harsher sentence, as she was the mastermind behind their schemes, but Daniel wasn't spared either. Watching them be led away in handcuffs for the second time, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. After the trial, I returned to my mansion, not as a prisoner, but as its rightful owner. It felt strange at first, walking through those familiar halls, now empty of the people who had once filled them with deceit and danger. I spent weeks reclaiming the space, removing every trace of Daniel and Evelyn. It was painful, but it was also healing. This was my home, and I was determined to make it a sanctuary again. The public response to my story was overwhelming. People reached out from all over, sharing their own experiences of betrayal and resilience. I realized I wasn't alone, and that gave me strength. I decided to use my platform to raise awareness about financial abuse and domestic violence. If my story could help even one person escape a toxic situation, it would be worth it. Looking back now, I see how much I've changed. The Olivia who married Daniel was naive and trusting, but the Olivia who stands here today is stronger, wiser, and unafraid to fight for what's right. It wasn't an easy journey, and there were moments when I thought I wouldn't survive. But I did. I learned to trust myself again, to rebuild the life they tried to take from me. My scars, both physical and emotional, are reminders of what I endured, but they're also symbols of my resilience. I didn't just survive, I thrived. One evening, as I stood in the garden of my mansion, watching the sun set over the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The nightmare was over, and I was free. Free to live, free to love, and free to be myself. This is my story. Not of defeat, but of victory. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that even in the darkest moments, there's always a way to rise again. You just have to find the strength within you to take that first step. On my first day in the office, my overbearing mother-in-law handed me a mop and ordered me to clean the floor. I refused because I had been appointed as a personal advisor, not a cleaner. She became angry and demanded, "Why don't you obey my orders?" Furious, she threw hot coffee on me, burning my hand and face. I was in pain and crying. To my shock, my husband sided with her and kicked me out of the house. An hour later, I returned with my brother and gave them a shocking surprise they could never have imagined. I still remember the day I first met Liam. It was during our second year in college, and we were both finance majors. Liam was charming, with an easy smile and an ambition that matched my own. We started as study partners, then friends, and soon enough, we were inseparable. By the time we graduated, we were deeply in love, and marriage felt like the natural next step. After graduation, I had dreams of making a mark in the world of finance, but Liam's family was rooted in tradition. His mother, Caroline, was an imposing woman who seemed to have a strong hold over every aspect of Liam's life. She ran their family business in Chicago and had made it clear from the beginning that she valued control and loyalty above all else. When Liam proposed, I was thrilled. We moved to Chicago shortly after, and I was hopeful for a fresh start, a life of love and mutual respect. Initially, things seemed wonderful. Liam was attentive, and Caroline, while stern, was cordial enough. But as the days turned into weeks, the cracks began to show. Caroline had a way of making me feel small, without saying much. She would comment on everything, from the way I dressed to how I cooked, always with a thinly veiled criticism. "Oh, Barbara, you're so modern," she'd say with a laugh, as if it were a flaw. I brushed it off at first, telling myself that adjusting to a new family takes time. But it wasn't just her words. It was her actions. She'd rearrange the kitchen after I had organized it or redo tasks I had completed, as if to say I wasn't good enough. Liam, unfortunately, did little to intervene. "She's just like that," he would say, shrugging off her behavior as unchangeable. Still, I held on to hope. I thought if I could prove my worth, things would get better. I decided to approach Liam about joining their family business. With my finance degree and fresh perspective, I believed I could contribute meaningfully. Liam was hesitant at first. "You know how my mom is," he said. "She likes to keep things traditional." "Liam, I just want to help," I replied. "I want to be part of this family in every way." Eventually, he agreed. "Fine," he said, though his tone didn't sound entirely supportive. "I'll talk to her." The morning of my first day at the office, I dressed carefully, wanting to make a good impression. I arrived with excitement, ready to prove myself. But when I walked into the office, Caroline's face froze. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I've joined the business," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Oh, really? And what do you think you'll be doing here?" Before I could answer, she continued, "You can start by cleaning the office. There's a mop in the closet. You'll find it soon enough." I was stunned. "That's not my job," I said firmly. "I'm here to work in finance, not as a cleaner." Her face darkened. Without warning, she grabbed a cup of hot coffee from her desk and hurled it at me. The liquid scalded my hand and soaked my blouse. I gasped in pain, staring at her in disbelief. "Now clean this up," she said with a sneer. Liam, who had been standing nearby, said nothing. He just looked away, as if he couldn't be bothered. That moment broke something in me. The humiliation, the pain, and Liam's silence, it was too much to bear. I left the office, tears streaming down my face, my heart heavy with betrayal. That night, I packed my things and called my brother, Ethan, who lived in New York City. He was my anchor, the one person who had always believed in me. "Ethan," I said, my voice trembling, "I need your help. I can't stay here anymore." "Barbara, what happened?" he asked, his tone filled with concern. I told him everything, the insults, the coffee, Liam's indifference. By the end, I could hear the anger in his voice.
"Come to New York," he said.
"You don't have to deal with this alone." And just like that, I knew what I had to do. The life I had dreamed of with Liam was gone, replaced by a reality I could no longer ignore. My love for him had been overshadowed by his silence and Caroline's cruelty. It was time to leave and start anew. As I boarded the train to New York, I felt a mix of emotions: sadness for what I had lost, anger for how I had been treated, and a quiet determination to rebuild my life. What I didn't know was that this journey would lead me to uncover secrets that would change everything. Leaving Chicago felt like shedding a heavy weight. When I arrived in New York City, Ethan was waiting for me at the station. His warm hug and reassuring smile were exactly what I needed. Ethan had always been my rock, calm, wise, and fiercely protective. "Barbara," he said gently as we sat down in his apartment later that evening, "I'm glad you're here. But we need to talk about what happened." I recounted everything: Caroline's insults, the coffee incident, and Liam's complete lack of support. As I spoke, Ethan's expression shifted from concern to anger. "She had no right to treat you that way," he said firmly. "And Liam, he should have stood by you." "I know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not just about the humiliation. There's something else, Ethan. I can feel it. The way Caroline runs the business, the way Liam avoids discussing it. It doesn't add up." Ethan leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "What are you saying?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I want to find out. I want to know the truth about them, about the business. If they're hiding something, I need to expose it." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll start digging. But we need to be smart about this. If they're involved in something illegal, it could be dangerous." Over the next few days, Ethan and I came up with a plan. He suggested hiring a private investigator, someone who could look into Liam and Caroline's financial dealings. I agreed, knowing that I wouldn't be able to uncover much on my own. The investigator, a sharp and discreet man named Robert, agreed to take the case. "I'll need some time," he said. "But if there's anything suspicious, I'll find it." While Robert began his work, I decided to focus on my own research. Using the skills I'd honed during my finance degree, I started analyzing public records, financial statements, and anything else I could get my hands on. It wasn't easy. Caroline and Liam were careful to keep their dealings private, but I found small discrepancies, subtle signs that something wasn't right. Ethan was my constant support, guiding me through the legal aspects and keeping me grounded when the frustration became overwhelming. "Barbara," he said one evening, "you're doing the right thing. Don't let them intimidate you." Weeks passed, and then Robert called. "Barbara," he said, his voice serious, "we need to meet. I've found something you'll want to see." When Ethan and I met Robert at his office, he laid out the evidence he'd gathered. Bank statements, offshore accounts, falsified invoices, it was all there. The numbers didn't lie. Caroline and Liam were involved in massive financial fraud. They had been embezzling funds, laundering money through shell companies, and evading taxes for years. As I stared at the evidence, a mix of emotions washed over me. Anger at their deceit, sadness for what could have been, and determination to bring them to justice. "There's more," Robert said, interrupting my thoughts. "It seems Caroline had plans to pin the financial irregularities on you, Barbara. She's already started creating a paper trail to make it look like you were involved." My heart sank. The humiliation, the coffee, the insults, they weren't just acts of cruelty. They were part of a calculated plan to frame me. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder. "We won't let that happen," he said firmly. "We'll fight this." The next few days were a blur of activity. Ethan and I worked closely with Robert, compiling the evidence into a comprehensive case. I used my finance expertise to trace the flow of money, creating detailed reports that would be impossible to refute. As we prepared to take the case to the authorities, I couldn't help but think about Liam. How much had he known? Was he as deeply involved as Caroline, or had he been manipulated too? The thought of him standing by silently while his mother plotted against me filled me with a sense of betrayal I couldn't shake. One evening, as Ethan and I reviewed the final pieces of evidence, he looked at me and said, "Barbara, are you ready for this? Once we go to the authorities, there's no turning back." I took a deep breath, the weight of everything settling on my shoulders. "I'm ready," I said. "They've taken enough from me. It's time to fight back." The following morning, we submitted the evidence to the federal authorities. It was a nerve-wracking experience, but I felt a sense of relief knowing that the truth was finally coming to light. As we left the federal office, Ethan turned to me. "This isn't over yet," he said. "But you've already won, Barbara. You stood up for yourself. That takes courage." His words stayed with me as we walked away. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The battle wasn't over, but I was no longer the helpless victim. I was in control of my story now, and I wasn't going to let Caroline and Liam take that away from me. What I didn't know was that the fight was about to get even more intense, and the secrets we uncovered would shake me to my core. When I decided to take the evidence to the authorities, I thought the hardest part was behind me. But I was wrong. What came next was a whirlwind of revelations, confrontations, and emotions I wasn't prepared for. A few days after submitting the evidence, Ethan and I were contacted by the federal investigators. They needed us to clarify some details and provide context for the documents we'd shared. I sat across from the agents in a sterile, dimly lit room, answering their questions with as much clarity and composure as I could muster. "This is a strong case," one of the agents said, sliding the evidence across the table. "But we'll need your testimony to solidify it. Are you willing to do that?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they face justice." While the investigation progressed, the authorities began surveilling Caroline and Liam's business activities. Ethan and I were warned to keep everything confidential. "Don't let them suspect anything," one of the agents had said. "We need the element of surprise." It wasn't easy to act as if nothing had changed. Caroline and Liam tried to reach out to me, likely to gauge whether I was still a threat. Liam left several voicemails, his tone switching between guilt and anger. "Barbara, you can't just walk away like this," one message said. "Come home, and let's talk." But I knew better. His words were hollow. He had stood by while his mother humiliated me and plotted to destroy me. There was nothing left to say. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. Robert, our investigator, called with a critical update. "Barbara," he said, his voice urgent, "I've uncovered something bigger. You need to hear this in person." Ethan and I met Robert the next morning at his office. He looked more serious than usual, which made my stomach churn. "Barbara, it turns out the fraud isn't just about money laundering and embezzlement," Robert began. "They've been involved in smuggling, too. We found evidence linking them to an international ring." My mind raced. Smuggling? That was far beyond what I had imagined. Robert handed me a folder. Inside were detailed reports and photographs, transactions for illicit goods, correspondence with shadowy international contacts, and shipment manifests that pointed to illegal activity. "It's not just Caroline and Liam," Robert continued. "They have partners in this. Powerful ones. That's why they've been untouchable for so long." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just about exposing them, it was about dismantling an entire network of corruption. As the gravity of the situation sank in, I realized how dangerous this had become. But I couldn't back down now. "What happens next?" I asked Ethan. "We take this to the investigators," he said firmly. "But we need to be careful. If Caroline or Liam suspects anything, they might try to retaliate." The following weeks were some of the most nerve-wracking of my life. Federal agents began preparing for a raid on Caroline and Liam's business, gathering the final pieces of evidence. I was kept in the loop but warned to stay low. It was during this time that Liam made one last attempt to manipulate me. He showed up at Ethan's apartment unannounced. I opened the door and froze when I saw him standing there, his face a mixture of desperation and anger. "Barbara," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You don't understand," he said, his tone softening. "My mother, she's not as bad as you think. She's just protective. She didn't mean to hurt you." I stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling within me. "Not as bad as I think." I shot back. "She threw coffee at me. She humiliated me. And she's trying to frame me for crimes she committed." Liam looked away, his jaw tightening. "I didn't know about that," he admitted. "But you can't let this go any further. You don't know what you're getting into." His words confirmed what I already suspected. He knew about the illegal activities, but he had chosen to stay silent. "I'm done with your lies, Liam," I said, my voice firm. "You and your mother will have to face the consequences." For a moment, he looked as though he wanted to argue, but then he turned and walked out without another word. The raid happened 2 days later. I wasn't there to witness it, but the agents told us it went as planned. Caroline and Liam were arrested on multiple charges, including tax evasion, embezzlement, money laundering, and smuggling. But the most shocking twist came during their interrogation. Caroline had been laying the groundwork to frame me for the financial crimes. She had even falsified emails and documents in my name, creating a narrative that would have made me the perfect scapegoat. When the investigators told me this, I felt a wave of both anger and relief. Anger at her calculated cruelty, and relief that we had stopped her before she could execute her plan. As the news of their arrest spread, their once powerful empire crumbled. Their partners began distancing themselves, and the media exposed every detail of their corruption. But even as I watched their downfall, I knew this wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and proving that I wasn't a victim. I had fought back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my story. What I didn't anticipate was how deeply their betrayal would continue to haunt me. The battle wasn't just against them. It was against the scars they had left behind. And that was a fight I would have to face alone. The arrests of Caroline and Liam sent shockwaves through their world. Their glamorous facade, the successful business, the influential connections, crumbled under the weight of their crimes. The media swarmed the case, plastering their faces across headlines. The story of their betrayal and illegal activities became the talk of Chicago. But for me, this wasn't a victory parade. It was closure. For weeks after their arrest, I was called in to provide testimony and clarify evidence. Sitting across from federal agents, recounting every detail of my experiences, felt like reliving a nightmare. But I knew it was necessary. I wanted the truth to be heard, not just for my sake, but for everyone they had wronged. The most harrowing part came during the trial. As I sat in the courtroom, Caroline and Liam avoided looking at me. Their lawyers tried to paint them as misunderstood and hard-working businesspeople, but the evidence was undeniable. Bank records, falsified documents, offshore accounts. All of it proved the extent of their crimes. The moment that hit me the hardest was when Liam took the stand. He looked like a shell of the man I had once loved, his arrogance replaced by desperation. Under cross-examination, he admitted to knowing about the illegal activities, but claimed he had been coerced by his mother. "She controls everything," he said, his voice breaking. I didn't know how to stop her. I felt a pang of pity, but it was fleeting. He had choices. He could have stood by me. Instead, he had chosen silence and complicity. The verdict was swift and damning. Caroline and Liam were found guilty on multiple charges, including fraud, tax evasion, and smuggling. Caroline received a 25-year prison sentence, while Liam was sentenced to 15 years. Watching them being led away in handcuffs was a bittersweet moment. After the trial, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. I had fought so hard for justice, and now that it was over, I wasn't sure what came next. For weeks, I stayed with Ethan, trying to process everything. One evening, as we sat in his living room, he said, "Barbara, you've done something incredible. You stood up for yourself and brought down people who thought they were untouchable. But now, it's time to think about you. What do you want for your futures?" His words stayed with me. I realized I had spent so much time fighting the past that I hadn't thought about what came next. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I decided to use my experience to help others. With Ethan's encouragement, I started my own financial consulting firm in New York City. I wanted to help small businesses avoid the traps of corruption and mismanagement that had destroyed Liam's family. The work was fulfilling, but the scars of betrayal lingered. Trust didn't come easily anymore. I kept people at arm's length, afraid of being hurt again. But over time, I found healing in my work and in the support of those who truly cared for me. One day, as I was walking through Central Park, I stopped to reflect on everything that had happened. The pain, the betrayal, the fight for justice, it had all shaped me into the person I was now. Stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Looking back, I realized that Caroline and Liam's betrayal had taught me something important. It had shown me the value of standing up for myself, of not letting anyone silence my voice. Life didn't turn out the way I had envisioned when I married Liam, but I found something better, a sense of self-worth that no one could take away. As I stood there, watching the sun set over the city, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The fight was over, and I had won, not just in the courtroom, but in reclaiming my life. This was my story, and it was only just beginning. On our first wedding anniversary, everything fell apart. My mother-in-law stood up in front of everyone and accused me of stealing her luxury gold watch. My husband silenced the room, demanding I return it immediately. Furious, I shouted, "How dare you accuse me?" But before I could say more, he struck me hard across the face and called the police. I was dragged away in handcuffs while they laughed at my humiliation. But they never expected what happened next, because I came back the very next day with a surprise that turned their world upside down. My name is Sophia, and this is the story of how my life took a turn I could never have imagined. It all started 2 years ago when I married Ethan. I was 28, full of hope, and madly in love. Ethan, a 30-year-old banker, seemed like the perfect partner, kind, supportive, and driven. I had inherited a beautiful house from my parents, and the thought of starting a life together in that home felt like the beginning of a fairy tale. At first, everything seemed perfect. Ethan and I settled into the house, and for a while, it was just the two of us. Then came Margaret, Ethan's mother. Margaret, a wealthy socialite with a penchant for control, decided to move into the guest suite temporarily. She said it was to help us adjust to married life, but looking back, I realize it was her first step in asserting dominance over our lives. Margaret was not an easy woman to please. She had a way of making you feel small without ever raising her voice. At every turn, she criticized me, my cooking, my decorating, even the way I handled household finances. "Sophia," she'd say with a sharp tone, "you really think this shade of blue suits the living room? It's so juvenile." Ethan would laugh it off, telling me not to take her too seriously, but her words cut deep. I tried my best to keep the peace, thinking things would improve with time. But Margaret's presence only grew more oppressive. Every decision I made was questioned, and Ethan, to my dismay, rarely took my side. "She's just trying to help," he'd say, brushing off my concerns. I began to feel like an outsider in my own home. The first year of our marriage was a test of endurance. Every day felt like walking on eggshells around Margaret, who seemed to enjoy finding new ways to assert her control. Ethan's passive nature made things worse. He was so easily swayed by his mother that I often wondered if he even noticed how unhappy I was. But I loved him, and I held on, hoping things would change. Then came our first wedding anniversary, a day I had envisioned as a celebration of love and resilience. Ethan and I decided to host a grand party at our home. Margaret was, of course, heavily involved in the planning. "Leave it to me," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I wanted the day to be special, so I reluctantly let her take charge. The party was beautiful. Margaret spared no expense. Guests filled our home, laughing, dancing, and toasting to our one-year milestone. I almost felt happy. Then everything changed. It started subtly. Margaret's icy smile became more pronounced as the evening went on. She mingled with the guests, her voice just loud enough for me to hear snippets of her conversations. "Sophia's lucky to have Ethan," she'd say, her tone dripping with condescension. I ignored it, reminding myself that this was our celebration, not hers. Then, during dinner, she stood up, tapping her glass to get everyone's attention. "I have something important to say," she announced, her voice commanding silence in the room. I glanced at Ethan, who looked as puzzled as I felt. Margaret held up her wrist, bare except for a faint tan line where a watch had once been. "My luxury watch, a family heirloom, is missing," she said, her gaze landing squarely on me. My heart sank. It was here this morning, and now it's gone. The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, and I felt their eyes on me. "Sophia," Margaret continued, her voice cold, "you were the last person near my room. Do you know anything about this?" I stared at her, stunned. "No," I stammered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I would never." "Don't lie," she snapped, her facade of politeness crumbling. "You've always been envious of our family's wealth. It's shameful." The room erupted in murmurs, and I felt like the walls were closing in. I turned to Ethan, desperate for support. "Ethan, you know I didn't do this." But he didn't defend me. Instead, he stood up, his face a mix of anger and embarrassment. "Sophia," he said, his voice harsh, "if you took it, return it now. Don't make this worse." "I didn't take anything," I cried, tears streaming down my face. "How can you believe this?" Ethan's response was swift and shocking. In front of everyone, he struck me hard across the face. Gasps filled the room as I staggered backward, clutching my cheek. "Enough lies," he shouted. "I'll call the police." Before I could process what was happening, the police arrived. Ethan accused me of theft, and despite my protests, they handcuffed me and led me out of my own home. The last thing I saw before the doors closed behind me was Margaret's triumphant smirk and Ethan's cold, unforgiving eyes. As I sat in the police car, tears blurring my vision, one thought burned in my mind. This was not the life I had signed up for. I had been betrayed by the man I loved and humiliated in front of everyone. But deep inside, a spark of determination began to flicker. They had taken everything from me, my dignity, my home, my trust, but I wasn't going to let them win. This was only the beginning. The night I was taken away by the police felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The humiliation of being handcuffed in front of family, friends, and strangers still burned in my memory. Margaret's smirk and Ethan's indifference haunted me. Sitting in the cold interrogation room, I realized I was completely alone. The police officers questioned me for hours. They asked if I had stolen the watch, if I had any grudges against my mother-in-law, and where I had been that day. Over and over, I insisted on my innocence, but their skeptical looks told me they didn't believe me. They even searched my belongings, as if the watch would magically appear in my purse or pockets. Of course, they found nothing. The humiliation deepened. Eventually, they let me go due to lack of evidence, but the damage was already done. I walked out of the station in the early hours of the morning, dazed and shattered. I wanted to go home, but where was home now? My house, my inheritance, had been claimed by Ethan and Margaret as if it had never belonged to me. I ended up at a small motel, feeling more lost than I ever had in my life. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I stared at my reflection in the cracked mirror. My cheek was still red and swollen from Ethan's slap. The pain was a cruel reminder of how far things had spiraled out of control. How had I ended up here? How had I let them do this to me? For the next few days, I drifted through life in a fog. Calls from friends and family flooded my phone, most of them gossiping about what had happened. Nobody offered real support, just curiosity wrapped in thin layers of concern. I didn't answer. What could I say? That my husband had turned on me, that I'd been framed, that I'd lost everything? I didn't want their pity. I needed a plan. Then, like a cruel joke, I received an eviction notice. Even though the house was legally mine, Ethan had manipulated the situation and transferred ownership to himself. He used our marriage as a weapon to take what my parents had left me. The notice was my breaking point. I wasn't just hurt anymore, I was furious. They had humiliated me, stolen my home, and tried to paint me as a thief. But I wasn't going to let them win. Something inside me shifted that day. I wasn't going to be their victim. I was going to fight back. The first step was filing a police report against Ethan and Margaret. I walked into the same station where I had been interrogated and told the officers everything. I told them how Margaret had falsely accused me, how Ethan had struck me, and how they had fraudulently taken over my inheritance. The officers listened, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. It was obvious they thought it was just a domestic squabble. But I wasn't going to let them dismiss me. This isn't just about me, I said firmly. It's about justice. They've stolen everything I have, and I can prove it. That's when I was introduced to Detective Laura Reed, a no-nonsense investigator who immediately took my case seriously. Laura was in her early 40s, sharp and methodical, with a calm demeanor that put me at ease. She promised to look into my claims, but warned me that it would take time to build a case.
They sound clever, she said.
But clever people leave trails. Over the next few weeks, Laura and her team worked tirelessly. They combed through financial records, legal documents, and witness statements. I provided them with everything I had, emails, bank statements, even texts from Ethan that hinted at his plans to take control of the house. It was a slow and grueling process, but I felt a sense of purpose for the first time in weeks. During this time, I also began to regain my confidence. I found support in unexpected places, like the kind woman who ran the motel I was staying in. Her name was Maria, and she offered me warm meals and words of encouragement when I needed them most. "You're stronger than you think," she said one evening. "Don't let them take that away from you." One day, Laura called me with a breakthrough. "Sophia," she said, her voice tinged with excitement, "we've found something. Ethan and Margaret have been siphoning money from your accounts into a separate trust. They've been covering their tracks well, but we have enough evidence to proceed." Hearing those words felt like a lifeline. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of hope. Laura explained that they would need more time to build an airtight case, but I was finally starting to see the cracks in Ethan and Margaret's perfect facade. It wasn't just about the money or the house anymore. It was about reclaiming my life and standing up for myself. They had tried to destroy me, but I was still standing. And I wasn't going to stop until I saw them face justice. As the days turned into weeks, I prepared myself for what was to come. The case was getting stronger, but I knew Ethan and Margaret wouldn't go down without a fight.
I was ready for them.
For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control. They had underestimated me, and soon, they would regret it. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about revenge. The weeks that followed were some of the most challenging of my life, but they were also filled with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. Detective Laura Reed and her team worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. Every new piece of evidence they found felt like a small victory, a step closer to reclaiming what had been stolen from me. Laura kept me updated regularly, and each time we met, she brought news that strengthened the case. One day, she sat across from me in her small, cluttered office and slid a folder across the desk. "Sophia, this is big," she said. "We've traced significant amounts of money being transferred from your personal accounts to an offshore account linked to Ethan." I opened the folder and saw the damning evidence laid out in black and white. Ethan had been systematically stealing from me, using our shared accounts to funnel my inheritance into his name. I felt a mix of anger and relief. It was painful to see how far he'd gone to betray me, but it was also proof that I wasn't imagining things. Laura leaned back in her chair, her sharp eyes studying me. "We're also looking into Margaret's involvement. From what we've gathered, she's been orchestrating this from the start. She manipulated Ethan and used him to do her dirty work." Hearing that confirmed what I had always suspected. Margaret had never accepted me, and she had done everything in her power to tear me down. But now, the tables were starting to turn. As the investigation continued, I found myself reflecting on my marriage. How had I not seen this coming? How had I allowed Ethan and Margaret to take control of my life? The truth was, I had been so blinded by love that I ignored the red flags. Ethan's inability to stand up to his mother, Margaret's constant belittling, it was all there from the beginning. I just didn't want to see it. One evening, as I sat in my motel room, I received a call from Laura. "Sophia," she said, her voice serious, "we've found something else. Ethan and Margaret have been trying to sell the house. They've listed it under a fake name to avoid suspicion." My heart sank. The house wasn't just a building to me. It was the last piece of my parents' legacy. The thought of them profiting from it made my blood boil. "Can we stop them?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "Yes," Laura said firmly. "We've already filed an injunction to freeze the sale. They can't touch the property until this case is resolved." That was the moment I realized how important it was to keep fighting. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting my parents' memory and ensuring that Ethan and Margaret didn't get away with their cruelty. The next major breakthrough came when Laura's team uncovered emails between Ethan and Margaret. In these emails, Margaret explicitly instructed Ethan on how to manipulate me into signing over the house. Her words were cold and calculating, with no regard for the damage they were causing. "You see, Sophia," Laura said as she showed me the emails, "this isn't just about fraud. It's about emotional abuse, too. They planned this from the start." I felt a surge of anger as I read Margaret's words. She had always presented herself as a sophisticated, well-mannered woman, but these emails revealed her true nature. She was a schemer, a manipulator, and a liar. And now, the world would see her for who she really was. The case finally went to court, and I was both nervous and determined. Walking into that courtroom was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but I knew I had no choice. Ethan and Margaret were there, sitting smugly at the defendant's table. Margaret's cold gaze met mine, and I could see the disdain in her eyes. Ethan looked uneasy, but he avoided making eye contact with me. The trial was intense. Laura and her team presented the evidence meticulously, leaving no room for doubt. They showed the financial records, the forged documents, and the incriminating emails. Witnesses were called, including friends and acquaintances who testified about Margaret's manipulative behavior and Ethan's questionable actions. Sitting in that courtroom, I felt a mix of emotions. There were moments when I wanted to cry, moments when I wanted to scream, and moments when I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. This was my fight, and I was finally taking back control. One of the most powerful moments came when Laura cross-examined Margaret. "Mrs. Connors," she said, her voice calm but firm, "can you explain why you accused Sophia of stealing your watch when no evidence of theft was ever found?" Margaret faltered, her composed facade cracking. I believed she had taken it," she stammered. "Believed?" Laura pressed. "Or was it a convenient way to humiliate her and justify taking over her assets?" Margaret's silence spoke volumes. The courtroom was tense, and I could feel the eyes of the jury shifting toward her with judgment. By the time the trial concluded, I knew the tide had turned. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury saw through their lies. The prosecutor gave a closing statement that left no room for doubt. Ethan and Margaret were guilty of fraud, theft, and emotional abuse. The judge delivered the verdict swiftly. Both Ethan and Margaret were found guilty and sentenced to prison. My assets, including the house, were to be returned to me immediately. As the verdict was announced, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I had won. But more than that, I had reclaimed my dignity. This wasn't just a legal victory, it was a personal one. For the first time in a long time, I felt strong, empowered, and ready to start anew. The fight was over, but my journey was just beginning. As the courtroom emptied and the final echoes of the gavel faded, I sat still, letting the weight of everything settle. It was over. Ethan and Margaret were led away in handcuffs, their smugness replaced with disbelief and fear. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. Laura approached me, a satisfied smile on her face. "You did it, Sophia," she said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "They got what they deserved." "Thank you," I replied, my voice steady, but filled with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." Leaving the courthouse that day, I realized how much had changed. I had started this journey broken and humiliated, but now I felt stronger than I ever thought possible. Justice had been served, and the pieces of my life were finally starting to come back together. Underscore 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 underscore. The days that followed were filled with small victories. The house, my parents' legacy, was officially returned to me. Walking through its halls again was bittersweet. The memories of the betrayal that took place there were hard to ignore, but I was determined to reclaim it as my own. The first thing I did was redecorate, erasing every trace of Ethan and Margaret's presence. Each brushstroke of paint and every new piece of furniture felt like a step toward healing. Financially, I was back on stable ground. The court ordered the return of all the money Ethan had siphoned from my accounts. It wasn't just about the money, it was about restoring what was rightfully mine. With each account balance restored, I felt a little closer to reclaiming the independence I had lost. But the most important victory was emotional. For so long, I had let Ethan and Margaret's manipulation define me. Their betrayal had left scars, but now, those scars felt more like badges of resilience. I wasn't the same person I had been when I married Ethan, and that was a good thing. One afternoon, as I sat in my favorite armchair overlooking the garden, Laura called. "Sophia," she said, her voice warm, "I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" "I'm good," I said, surprised at the truth of my own words. "Better than I thought I'd be." "I'm glad to hear that," she replied. "You've come a long way." We talked for a while, and as I hung up, I realized how grateful I was, not just for Laura's help, but for the journey that had brought me here. It hadn't been easy, but it had taught me more about myself than I ever thought possible. A few weeks later, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time: celebrate. I invited close friends and the few family members who had supported me through the ordeal to a small gathering at the house. It wasn't a grand party like the one Margaret had orchestrated. It was intimate and heartfelt, a celebration of new beginnings. As the evening progressed, I stood in the garden, watching my friends laugh and enjoy themselves. The air was warm, and the scent of blooming flowers filled the space. For the first time in a long time, I felt at home, not just in the house, but in my own life. Maria, the motel owner who had shown me so much kindness, approached me with a smile. "You look happy, Sophia," she said. "You deserve this." "I do, don't I?" I replied, surprising myself with my confidence. Months passed, and life began to feel normal again. I threw myself into work, taking on new clients and projects that reignited my passion for design. Slowly, I started to dream again, not of the life I had once planned with Ethan, but of a future that was entirely my own. One day, I came across a photo of myself and Ethan taken during the early days of our relationship. I stared at it for a moment, expecting to feel anger or sadness. Instead, I felt nothing but a quiet resolve. That chapter of my life was over, and I had emerged stronger. Looking back now, I see that the betrayal I endured was a turning point, not just in my life, but in who I am. It taught me the value of resilience, the importance of fighting for what's right, and the strength that comes from standing up for yourself. It wasn't the path I would have chosen, but it led me to a place of self-discovery and empowerment. I'm no longer the woman who let others control her life. I'm Sophia, a woman who fought back, reclaimed her dignity, and built a new life on her own terms. And for that, I am proud. This is my story, and it's only the beginning. My greedy husband and his ruthless mother tied me up and left me in a dark, freezing forest. Their chilling words still haunt me. "This is the end for you.
Goodbye."
Your $100 million business is ours now." Helpless and unable to move, I thought it was over, until an old forest ranger miraculously saved me. But I wasn't just a victim. I returned with a plan they never saw coming, and a shocking revenge that left them speechless. My name is Samantha. I am 28 years old, a businesswoman based in New York City. I have always been ambitious, determined to build a successful career, and I thought my life was finally complete when I married Ethan, the man I believed was my soulmate. Ethan was charming, thoughtful, and supportive, or so I thought. I was drawn to his warm demeanor, and I believed we would build a life full of love and happiness. When we married, I moved into his family home. That's where I met Margaret, his mother. At first, I tried my best to connect with her. Margaret was a sharp, confident woman in her 50s who had raised Ethan as a single mother. I respected her for that and wanted to create a bond, but it quickly became clear that Margaret wasn't interested in any sort of relationship with me. She was controlling, dismissive of my opinions, and, most importantly, obsessed with money. It didn't take long before Margaret started demanding money from me. It began subtly, with small requests for help with groceries or bills. But soon, she insisted that I give her $4,000 every month for her personal expenses. "It's only fair," she said, her tone making it sound like it was my duty as her son's wife. Ethan, to my surprise, supported her completely. "She's done so much for me, Samantha. The least we can do is help her out." I didn't want to cause conflict, so I agreed. At the time, I told myself it was temporary, that she just needed help adjusting after Ethan and I got married. But months turned into years, and I realized Margaret's demands weren't temporary at all. She would call me at work to remind me of the payment due date. If I was late, she would sulk or make snide comments about how I wasn't a real part of the family. Ethan, meanwhile, became more distant. Whenever I brought up Margaret's demands or the stress they were putting on me, he brushed it off. "You're overthinking it," he'd say, as if I were the one being unreasonable. I started noticing little changes in him. He'd stay out late, refuse to discuss his whereabouts, and become defensive whenever I asked questions. The man I had fallen in love with seemed to be slipping away. The breaking point came 2 years into our marriage. One evening, I came home from work earlier than usual and heard voices coming from the living room. Margaret and Ethan were talking, their voices low but clear enough for me to hear. "We'll sell her car," Margaret said. "It's worth enough to cover the buy-in for the game." Ethan hesitated for a moment before replying, "Are you sure she won't notice? Samantha loves that car." "She doesn't have to know," Margaret snapped. Just tell her it was stolen or something. It's not like she's going to call the cops on her own husband. I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding. My car, a sleek luxury vehicle I had saved for years to buy, was more than just a possession to me. It was a symbol of my independence, of everything I had worked for. Hearing them plot to sell it without my knowledge shattered something inside me. I didn't confront them that night. Instead, I started paying closer attention. I realized that the money I had been giving Margaret wasn't going toward her expenses at all. She and Ethan were using it to fuel their gambling habits. The realization left me feeling humiliated and betrayed. How could the people I trusted, my husband and his mother, lie to me so easily? Things escalated when I returned from a business trip a few weeks later and found my car missing. "Ethan," I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, "where's my car?" He exchanged a glance with Margaret, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Margaret said, "Oh, it must have been stolen. Such a shame, isn't it?" "Stolen," I repeated, my voice trembling. "Did you even call the police?" Ethan shrugged. "We didn't want to bother you while you were away." I knew they were lying. My hands shook as I demanded answers, and when they refused to admit the truth, I finally snapped. "You sold my car, didn't you?" I shouted. "You're nothing but thieves." Margaret's face twisted with anger. "How dare you speak to us like that?" she spat. "You've been nothing but a burden since the day you moved in." Before I could respond, Ethan grabbed my arm. "That's enough, Samantha," he said, his voice cold and unfamiliar. "You need to calm down." But I couldn't. I was furious, hurt, and terrified all at once. The argument escalated until Ethan and Margaret did something I never thought they were capable of. Together, they overpowered me, tied my hands, and forced me into their car. My screams and pleas went unanswered as they drove me deep into the woods. When they finally stopped, they dragged me out and left me there, alone and terrified, before speeding off into the night. I lay on the cold forest floor, my body aching, my mind racing. How had my life come to this? Was this really the man I had married? And Margaret, how could a mother be so cruel? As I stared up at the dark sky, one thought burned in my mind. I would not let this be the end of my story. This betrayal wouldn't destroy me. It would only make me stronger. I lay in that cold, dark forest for what felt like hours. My wrists were raw from the ropes, and my body ached from being thrown out of the car, like I was nothing. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, anger, and disbelief. How could Ethan and Margaret do this to me? My husband, the man who promised to love and protect me, had left me for dead. I refused to give in to despair. Survival was my only focus. Summoning what strength I had, I managed to loosen the ropes binding my wrists. Once my hands were free, I sat up and scanned my surroundings. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the rustle of leaves and distant animal calls. I had no idea where I was, but I knew I couldn't stay there. After stumbling through the woods for what felt like an eternity, I saw a faint light in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was coming from a small cabin. Relief washed over me, but I was still cautious. I knocked on the door, my hands trembling, and a man answered. He was tall, in his early 40s, with a rugged appearance that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I need help," I said, barely able to get the words out. "They left me in the woods." "Come in," he said immediately, stepping aside to let me enter. "My name's Daniel. I'm a forest ranger. You're safe here." Daniel gave me water and a blanket as I told him what had happened. I didn't go into all the details, just enough for him to understand that my husband and his mother had done this to me. His expression hardened as I spoke. "No one has the right to treat you like that," he said firmly. "You don't deserve this." His kindness brought tears to my eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like someone genuinely cared. Daniel let me stay the night at his cabin, and the next morning, he drove me to a nearby town where I could contact someone I trusted. That person was my younger brother, Michael. Michael and I had always been close, and I knew I could count on him. When I called him and told him what had happened, he was furious. "I'm coming to get you right now," he said, his voice shaking with anger.
"Don't worry, Sam.
"We'll fix this." True to his word, Michael arrived within hours and took me back to his apartment in Boston. He didn't bombard me with questions. He just made sure I was comfortable and safe. Over the next few days, as I recounted everything to him, the money Margaret had demanded, the gambling, the missing car, and how they left me in the woods, Michael listened quietly, his jaw clenched. "They're not going to get away with this," he said when I finished. "We're going to make them pay." Michael's words sparked something in me. For too long, I had let Ethan and Margaret control me, manipulate me, and take advantage of my kindness. But now, with Michael by my side, I felt a renewed sense of strength.
It was time to take back my life.
Michael and I started by hiring a private investigator. We needed proof, solid, undeniable evidence of Ethan and Margaret's crimes. The investigator worked quickly, uncovering financial records that showed where my money had gone. It was all there, thousands of dollars spent on gambling, with no trace of the so-called expenses Margaret had claimed. The investigator also found video footage of Ethan and Margaret at various casinos, laughing and drinking as they squandered my hard-earned money. As the evidence piled up, my anger grew. But I knew we couldn't act impulsively. Michael reminded me to be patient, that we needed to have everything in place before confronting them. While the investigator worked, I decided to take matters into my own hands as well. I reached out to people who knew Ethan and Margaret, neighbors, acquaintances, even a few of Ethan's colleagues. Some of them had witnessed their gambling habits firsthand, but had never thought to intervene. One of Ethan's coworkers even admitted that Ethan had borrowed money from him to cover gambling debts. It wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was about building a case strong enough to ensure they couldn't worm their way out of it. I wasn't going to leave any stone unturned. As the weeks passed, I started to feel more like myself again. I was still angry and hurt, but I was channeling those emotions into something productive. Michael was my rock through it all, always there to support me and remind me of why I was fighting. "You deserve better than this, Sam," he would say. "And you're going to get it." The final piece of the puzzle came when the investigator uncovered the sale of my car. The documentation showed that Ethan had signed the paperwork, with Margaret listed as a witness. They had sold it to a private buyer for a fraction of its value, just to get quick cash for a poker game. When I saw the proof, I felt a mix of rage and satisfaction. They had lied to my face, stolen from me, and left me for dead. But now, I had everything I needed to bring them down. It was time to take the next step. Michael and I compiled all the evidence and contacted the police. When we handed over the files, the officer reviewing the case looked stunned.
"This is serious," he said.
"We'll start the investigation immediately." As we left the station, I felt a sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like justice was within reach. But I also knew this was just the beginning. Ethan and Margaret had underestimated me, but they were about to learn that I wasn't someone they could betray and walk away from. The day Michael and I filed the police report marked the beginning of a new chapter in my fight. It wasn't just about what Ethan and Margaret had done to me. It was about standing up for myself, reclaiming my dignity, and ensuring they were held accountable. But even with the police now involved, I knew I had to stay strong and see this through. Over the next few weeks, the police conducted their investigation. They reviewed the evidence we had provided, the financial records, the videos of Ethan and Margaret gambling, and the documents proving the sale of my car. They also interviewed people who had witnessed their behavior. Each piece of evidence added weight to the case, making it harder for Ethan and Margaret to deny their actions. One morning, I got a call from the lead detective handling my case. "Samantha," he said, "we're ready to move forward. We have enough evidence to make arrests." Hearing those words sent a wave of relief through me, but it was mixed with anxiety. I couldn't predict how Ethan and Margaret would react when they realized their game was up. Still, I knew this was the only way to finally free myself from their control. The arrests happened quietly. The police waited until Ethan and Margaret were at home before knocking on their door. I wasn't there to see it, but I later learned that Margaret tried to talk her way out of it, claiming there had been some sort of mistake. Ethan, on the other hand, looked shocked and confused, as if he couldn't believe this was happening. The news of their arrest spread quickly, and I started receiving calls from people who had known them. Some expressed disbelief, while others admitted they had always suspected something was wrong. It was strange to hear the sympathy in their voices after everything I had been through, but I appreciated their support nonetheless. Once Ethan and Margaret were in custody, the next step was the trial. Preparing for it was one of the most challenging parts of this journey. My lawyer walked me through the process, explaining what to expect and how to present my side of the story. I had to relive every painful detail, the lies, the theft, and the moment they left me in the forest. It was emotionally exhausting, but I reminded myself that this was necessary to ensure justice. On the day of the trial, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. I walked into the courtroom with Michael by my side, feeling his reassuring presence. Ethan and Margaret were already there, sitting with their lawyer. Ethan wouldn't look at me, but Margaret's gaze was cold and defiant, as if she still believed she could manipulate her way out of this. The prosecution presented the evidence we had gathered. The financial records were laid out for the court to see, showing how my money had been drained to fund their gambling habits. The investigators' report detailed the sale of my car, with Ethan's signature as undeniable proof. Video footage of Ethan and Margaret at various casinos played on a screen, their carefree smiles a stark contrast to the pain they had caused me. When it was my turn to testify, I felt the weight of everyone's eyes on me. I took a deep breath and began to speak, telling the court about my experience in my own words. I explained how Margaret had manipulated me into giving her money, how Ethan had supported her every demand, and how their betrayal had escalated to the point of leaving me for dead. I trusted them, I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. I trusted my husband, and I tried to respect his mother. But they saw me as nothing more than a source of money, someone they could use and discard when I was no longer convenient. As I spoke, I saw Ethan shift uncomfortably in his seat. Margaret's expression didn't change, but I could tell she was furious. She had always been confident in her ability to control others, and now she was losing that power. The defense tried to argue that the situation had been exaggerated, that there was no proof they had left me in the forest intentionally. But their arguments fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence. Witnesses testified about their gambling habits, and even Ethan's coworker spoke about the money Ethan had borrowed. When the judge announced the verdict, I felt like I was holding my breath. Ethan and Margaret were found guilty on multiple charges, including theft, fraud, and reckless endangerment. The judge didn't hold back in his sentencing, emphasizing the harm they had caused and their lack of remorse. As they were led away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of closure. This wasn't just a victory in the legal sense, it was a personal victory. For too long, I had let their betrayal define me, but now I was free to move forward with my life. Michael hugged me as we left the courtroom. "You did it, Sam," he said. "It's over." I nodded, feeling tears well up in my eyes. It was over. The people who had tried to destroy me were finally being held accountable, and I could start rebuilding my life. The courtroom was silent as the judge's gavel struck, signaling the end of Ethan and Margaret's reign of deceit. Watching them being led away in handcuffs felt surreal. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by fear or manipulation. Justice had been served, and I was finally free. As Michael and I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in years. But it wasn't just relief, it was empowerment. I had fought for myself, stood up to the people who had betrayed me, and emerged stronger. "Are you okay, Sam?" Michael asked as we got into his car. I nodded, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. "I'm more than okay. I feel like I can finally breathe." Over the next few weeks, I began to rebuild my life. With Ethan and Margaret in prison, I no longer had to endure their demands or their lies. But the emotional wounds they left behind would take time to heal. I started therapy to process everything I had been through, and it helped me rediscover parts of myself that I thought I had lost. I realized that their betrayal didn't define me. It was a chapter in my life, but not the whole story. Michael continued to be my biggest supporter. He offered me a place to stay in Boston while I figured out my next steps. I was hesitant at first. I had always been fiercely independent, and relying on others didn't come naturally to me. But Michael reminded me that it was okay to lean on people who truly cared. "Sam, you're not alone in this," he said one evening as we sat in his living room. "You've always been there for me. Let me be here for you now." With his encouragement, I started to feel more confident about the future. I decided to leave New York City behind, along with all the painful memories it held. Boston offered a fresh start, a chance to redefine myself and my goals. One of the first things I did was buy a new car, not as extravagant as the one I had lost, but it symbolized my freedom and independence. Driving it for the first time felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I also threw myself into my work. My business had always been a source of pride, and now it became a source of healing. Pouring my energy into my career helped me regain my sense of purpose and reminded me of my own strength and resilience. I even expanded my network in Boston, connecting with like-minded professionals who inspired me to keep pushing forward. Despite the progress I was making, there were moments when the past still haunted me. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing as I relived the moment Ethan and Margaret left me in the forest. But each time, I reminded myself that I was no longer that helpless woman. I had taken control of my life, and I wasn't going to let their actions hold me back. One day, I received a letter from Ethan. It came from the prison where he was serving his sentence. My hands trembled as I opened it, unsure of what to expect. In the letter, Ethan apologized for everything he had done. He claimed that he had been manipulated by Margaret, that he hadn't realized the extent of the harm he was causing. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. This was the man I had once loved, the man I had believed in. But as I read his words, I realized that his apology didn't change anything. He had made his choices, and those choices had consequences. I didn't owe him forgiveness. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I focused on the life I was building. I joined support groups where I connected with others who had experienced betrayal and toxic relationships. Hearing their stories reminded me that I wasn't alone, and it inspired me to share my own journey. I wanted others to know that they, too, could overcome even the darkest of times. As the months passed, I found myself smiling more often. I started going out with friends, exploring Boston, and rediscovering the joys of life. I even began dating again, cautiously, but with an open heart. I wasn't looking for a fairy tale, just someone who would treat me with the kindness and respect I deserved. One evening, Michael and I were sitting on his balcony, watching the city lights. "You've come a long way, Sam," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "I'm proud of you." "Thank you," I said, clinking my glass with his. "I couldn't have done it without you." As I sat there, surrounded by love and support, I realized how far I had come. The betrayal that had once shattered me no longer defined me. I had reclaimed my life, my independence, and my happiness. Ethan and Margaret's actions had tested me, but they hadn't broken me. This was my story, a story of betrayal, revenge, and triumph. But most importantly, it was a story of resilience and hope. I had learned that even in the darkest moments, there is always a way forward. And now, as I looked out at the world, I was ready for whatever came next. My husband and his diabolical mother-in-law celebrated my death after poisoning me for my $100 million inheritance, tossing me out like yesterday's trash. But they didn't count on one thing: I survived. The next day, I returned with a master plan to destroy them, and their nightmare was only beginning. My name is Evelyn, and for the longest time, I thought my life was perfect. I was married to Jake, a handsome and ambitious businessman, and we lived in a beautiful home in an affluent suburb of Chicago. To the outside world, I had everything: love, comfort, and security. But behind the closed doors of that house, my life was far from perfect. Jake and I had been married for 5 years. At first, he was everything I could have hoped for: caring, charming, and supportive. Things changed when my father passed away. Losing him was devastating. He was my rock, my biggest supporter. But even in my grief, I felt a glimmer of hope because he left me a $100 million inheritance. I thought it would be a safety net for our future, a way to honor his legacy. Little did I know, it would become the reason my life turned into a nightmare. It all began with Diane, Jake's mother. Diane was in her late 50s, a retired socialite who lived for appearances. She was always impeccably dressed, her smile polished but insincere. I'd always felt she didn't like me, but after my father's passing, her disdain became more obvious. She began spending more time at our house, under the guise of supporting us during a difficult time. But I knew better. Diane wasn't there to support me. She was there to meddle. I noticed small changes at first. Diane whispering to Jake, long conversations that would abruptly end when I entered the room. Jake became distant, snapping at me over trivial matters and questioning my decisions. It hurt, but I chalked it up to grief. I never imagined how deep Diane's manipulations ran. One evening, Diane sat me down in the kitchen. "Evelyn, dear," she began with a sickly sweet tone. "You need to think carefully about your inheritance. Jake and I just want what's best for you. Managing such a large sum can be overwhelming." Her words sounded kind, but her eyes told another story. She wanted control. I brushed her off, saying I had plans to work with my father's trusted financial advisor. Her smile faltered, and I saw a flash of anger. That's when I knew she wouldn't give up easily. A few weeks later, I started feeling unwell, nausea, dizziness, fatigue. At first, I thought it was stress or the grief catching up to me, but it kept getting worse. I noticed it was especially bad after meals. I tried to ignore it, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Then came the night that changed everything. I was in the dining room, finishing dinner with Jake and Diane. The food tasted off, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Moments later, the world started spinning. I felt my legs give way, and I collapsed to the floor. The last thing I heard before everything went black was Diane's voice, cold and triumphant. "It's time." When I woke up, I wasn't in my house. I was lying on a park bench, my body weak and trembling. My mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. Had Jake carried me here? Had Diane? Before I could make sense of it, a man's voice broke through my haze. "Miss, are you okay? Can you hear me?" I turned my head to see a kind face, a middle-aged man who looked genuinely concerned. I couldn't speak, but he didn't wait for an answer. He called 911 and stayed with me until the ambulance arrived. His kindness was a lifeline in that moment. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed my worst fears. There were traces of poison in my system. Someone had been poisoning me, and it wasn't a one-time thing. It had been happening over weeks. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut.
Diane, Jake,
They had done this to me.
but why?
The answer became clear when I overheard a conversation between two nurses outside my room. "She's lucky that man found her," one said. "They said she's got a $100 million inheritance. Makes you wonder who'd want her out of the picture." I felt sick, but not from the poison this time. It was from the betrayal. My husband, the man I loved, and his mother had tried to kill me. And for what? Money? Rage filled me, but so did determination. I wasn't going to let them win. I spent the next few days recovering, but I also began planning. Diane and Jake thought they'd gotten away with it, but they didn't realize I was still alive. I didn't know how I would fight back, but I promised myself one thing: I wouldn't let them destroy me. And so, I started my journey, not just to reclaim my inheritance, but to reclaim my life. Little did they know, they had awakened a side of me they'd never seen before. This was far from over. When I left the hospital, I was physically weak, but mentally sharper than ever. I knew I couldn't return home to face Jake and Diane without a plan. They believed they had succeeded in getting rid of me, but I was alive, and that was my advantage. I found refuge in a small hotel a few miles away, using the cash I had on hand to pay for a room. As I sat on the edge of the bed, the betrayal washed over me again. Jake, the man I had vowed to love and honor, had thrown me away like I was nothing. And Diane, her greed knew no bounds. I was done crying. I needed answers, and I needed proof. The first thing I did was call my father's financial advisor, Mr. Stanton. He was one of the few people I trusted completely. "Evelyn," he said, relief evident in his voice when he picked up. "I've been trying to reach you. Is everything all right?" "Not exactly," I admitted. "I think Jake and Diane are trying to steal my inheritance. Can you check if anything unusual has happened with my accounts?" "I'll look into it right away," he assured me. "Stay safe, Evelyn." A few hours later, Stanton called back, his voice grave. "Evelyn, there have been attempts to transfer funds from your accounts into a new trust under Diane's name. The documents claim you authorized it." My heart sank. "I didn't. She forged my signature."
"I thought as much," he said.
"I've frozen all activity on your accounts, but you'll need to act fast. They're not going to stop." Hearing that Diane was already trying to steal what was mine lit a fire in me. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance anymore, I was fighting for justice. I decided to start by gathering evidence. If Diane and Jake had been bold enough to forge documents, they might have left other trails behind. I started with social media. Diane had always been careful about her image, but she underestimated the power of a digital footprint. I combed through her posts and found photos of her at lavish events, wearing expensive jewelry and designer clothes she hadn't owned before. Where had she gotten the money? And then there was Jake. His Instagram was filled with cryptic captions like, "The start of a new era," and "Bigger things ahead." My stomach churned at the thought that they were celebrating their plans to ruin me. But social media alone wouldn't be enough. I needed something stronger, something undeniable. I decided to go back to the house, knowing it was a risk. I waited until I knew Diane would be out. She had a standing lunch appointment with her bridge club every Tuesday. Jake would be at work. It was the perfect time. When I entered the house, the familiar scent hit me like a wave of nostalgia and pain. This had been my home, my safe place. Now it felt like enemy territory. I moved quickly, heading to Diane's room first. She kept a lockbox in her closet. I'd seen her put papers in there before. After a few tries, I found the key taped under a drawer. Inside, I hit the jackpot. There were forged documents with my name, copies of my bank statements, and even a handwritten note outlining Plan B if I didn't cooperate. The note mentioned the poison and how Jake would take care of things if I became suspicious. My hands shook as I read it. This wasn't just fraud. This was attempted murder. I took pictures of everything with my phone before putting it all back exactly as I found it. On my way out, I passed the dining room and froze. The chair where I had collapsed that night was still there, a stark reminder of how close I had come to dying. I felt a surge of anger and vowed to make them pay. That evening, I sat in my hotel room, staring at my phone. I had the evidence, but I needed to make sure it reached as many people as possible. That's when the idea hit me. Social media. Diane and Jake had spent years curating their image as the perfect family. What better way to shatter it than by exposing their true selves? I created a video, carefully piecing together everything I had. Photos of the forged documents, screenshots of their social media posts, and even my hospital records showing the poison in my system. I narrated the video myself, telling the world what had happened. "My name is Evelyn," I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "This is the story of how my husband and his mother tried to kill me for my inheritance." I hesitated before posting it, worried about the fallout. But then I thought of my father, how he had always told me to stand up for what was right. With a deep breath, I hit upload. The response was immediate. Within hours, the video went viral. Comments flooded in, some offering support, others expressing outrage at Jake and Diane. News outlets picked up the story, and suddenly, the perfect facade they had built was crumbling. Diane's friends from her bridge club, Jake's business associates, even neighbors who had once idolized them, all were shocked. I watched it all unfold from my hotel room, a mix of satisfaction and fear swirling in my chest. This was only the beginning. Diane and Jake wouldn't take this lying down, but neither would I. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. They had tried to silence me, but now the whole world knew the truth. I wasn't going to stop until justice was served. This was my life, my inheritance, and my fight, and I was just getting started. The days after I uploaded the video felt like a whirlwind. My phone buzzed constantly with messages, some from people I hadn't spoken to in years, offering their support. Others were from reporters asking for interviews, but I ignored them. I didn't need fame or publicity. I needed justice. As the world turned against Diane and Jake, I kept a close eye on their movements. From the little I could gather, Diane was furious, and Jake was panicking. They had underestimated me, and now they were scrambling to do damage control. A week later, I received an anonymous message through social media. "I have information about Diane," it read. Skeptical but curious, I responded. The sender turned out to be one of Diane's former friends from her bridge club. She told me that Diane had been borrowing money from everyone she knew, spinning lies about needing it for family emergencies. It was clear now how desperate Diane had been even before my father's inheritance became a target. This was another piece of the puzzle, and I stored the information carefully. My plan was coming together, but I still needed more. I wasn't just going to let them squirm. I wanted airtight evidence that would leave no room for doubt. One afternoon, I received a call from Mr. Stanton, my father's financial advisor. "Evelyn, I think I've found something you'll want to see," he said. "Diane has been working with a shady attorney to create new forged documents. They're trying to make it look like you willingly handed over control of your estate." I clenched my fists, my anger rising. "Can you get me copies of those documents?" "I already have," he replied. "I'll send them over." "Be careful, Evelyn. They're cornered, and that makes them dangerous." Dangerous was an understatement. Diane was already known for her fiery temper, and the public backlash had only made her more unhinged. She had lost friends, her social standing, and her polished reputation. Now, she was blaming me for her downfall, completely ignoring her own actions. I decided it was time to confront Diane directly. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about holding her accountable for everything she'd done. But I wasn't foolish enough to go in unprepared. I knew Diane's temper would be my greatest weapon. I reached out to her through Jake. "Tell your mother to meet me at the family estate," I said. "I want to discuss a settlement." Jake sounded wary but intrigued. "A settlement? You're finally coming to your senses." I bit back the urge to scream. "Let's just say I'm tired of fighting." He agreed to set up the meeting, clearly unaware that I had no intention of settling. Instead, I planned to record everything, hoping Diane would incriminate herself further. The estate, once my home, now felt like a battlefield. I arrived early and set up a hidden camera in the living room, positioning it to capture the entire space. My heart pounded as I waited for Diane. This confrontation could go terribly wrong, but I had to take the risk. When Diane arrived, she was seething. Her eyes burned with anger, and her voice dripped with sarcasm. Well, the prodigal daughter returns. What's this nonsense about a settlement?" I kept my voice steady. "Diane, we need to end this before it gets worse. Let's talk." She crossed her arms and smirked. "Talk? Oh, sweetheart, the time for talking is over. You ruined everything. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to keep this family together? And for what? So you could play the victims?" I stayed calm, knowing she was walking straight into my trap. "You tried to kill me, Diane. How is that keeping the family together?" Her smirk vanished, replaced by a snarl. "You don't understand anything. That money should have been ours. Jake deserved it, not you. You think you're some saint, but you're just as selfish as the rest of us." She was unraveling, and I let her continue. "Jake and I did what we had to do. If you'd just handed over the inheritance like a good little wife, none of this would have happened." I stared at her, feigning shock. "So, you admit it? You poisoned me? You forged those documents?" Her face turned red, and she screamed, "Yes. And I'd do it again if it meant getting rid of you." My hands trembled, but I held her gaze. "Thank you for being honest, Diane." Before she could respond, I stood up and walked to the hidden camera, pulling it from its spot. Diane's eyes widened as realization dawned. "What is that?" I held it up, my heart racing. "Proof. Proof that you and Jake tried to destroy me." This is going straight to the police and the court. Diane lunged at me, her nails digging into my arm. You littles. I pushed her off and stepped back, my voice steady.
You've lost, Diane.
It's over. She screamed in frustration, but I didn't stay to watch her tantrum. I walked out of the estate, the hidden camera clutched tightly in my hand. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. That night, I reviewed the footage, my stomach churning at the venom in Diane's words. But I also felt a flicker of hope. This was the evidence I needed to finally take them down. Diane had revealed her true self, and now the world would see her for who she really was. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I prepared for the next battle, court. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. This wasn't just about reclaiming my inheritance anymore. This was about reclaiming my life. And I wasn't going to let Diane or Jake take that away from me ever again. The day of the trial arrived faster than I expected. I was nervous, but determined. Diane and Jake would be there, facing the consequences of their actions, and I was ready to expose their lies. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance, I was fighting for my dignity and my life. The courtroom was filled with tension. Diane sat beside Jake, her expression cold and defiant, while Jake avoided looking at me altogether. The once confident man I had married now seemed small and insignificant. It was strange to think I had ever loved him. My lawyer started with the recordings I had captured during my confrontation with Diane. The courtroom was silent as her voice echoed through the speakers, her venomous confession playing for everyone to hear. Yes, and I'd do it again if it meant getting rid of you. Her words hung in the air, and I could see the judge's expression harden. Diane's lawyer tried to object, but it was clear they had no defense. The evidence was damning. Next came the forged documents. Mr. Stanton had testified earlier about Diane's attempts to transfer my inheritance into her name. He explained the forged signatures, the illegal transactions, and how he had managed to stop them just in time. The jury was visibly shocked as each piece of evidence stacked against Diane and Jake. When it was my turn to testify, I told my story, starting from the night I collapsed at the dining table. I described the betrayal, the poisoning, and the moment I realized the people I trusted most had plotted to end my life for money. My voice trembled at times, but I didn't hold back. This was my truth, and I wasn't going to let fear silence me. The prosecution presented the medical evidence, hospital reports confirming the poison in my system, and the timeline that matched Diane's presence in the house. The Good Samaritan who found me testified about how he had seen me unconscious and called for help. His sincerity was a stark contrast to Diane's cold demeanor. Then came the turning point. Diane took the stand, and it was clear she was unraveling. At first, she tried to play the victim, accusing me of being manipulative and stealing her family. But the prosecutor was relentless. He cornered her with the recordings, the forged documents, and her own web of lies. Under pressure, Diane lost her composure. I did what I had to do, she shouted, her voice shaking with anger. She didn't deserve that money. Jake and I... Her lawyer tried to stop her, but the damage was done. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, and I felt a wave of relief. Diane's true colors were on full display, and there was no hiding now. Jake, on the other hand, was pathetic. When it was his turn to testify, he shifted blame onto Diane, claiming he had only gone along with her plan out of fear. I didn't know she would go that far, he stammered, avoiding eye contact with me. His cowardice was almost laughable. The trial lasted 2 weeks, but the verdict was worth every moment. Diane and Jake were found guilty of fraud, attempted murder, and forgery. The judge sentenced them to 10 years in prison. As the gavel came down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Justice had been served. But my story didn't end there. After the trial, I had a choice to make. Jake had written me a letter from prison, begging for forgiveness and asking me to wait for him. Diane, of course, had made no such gesture. Her pride wouldn't allow it. But I knew what I had to do. I filed for divorce. Jake had shown me his true colors, and I couldn't go back to the life I had before. My inheritance was secure, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my independence. I was no longer the naive woman who had let Diane and Jake control her life. Walking away from that chapter wasn't easy. I had loved Jake once, and part of me grieved for the life we could have had if he had been a better man. But I knew I deserved better. I deserved a life free from manipulation, greed, and betrayal. With Diane and Jake behind bars, their reputations destroyed, I began to rebuild. I used part of my inheritance to start a charity in my father's name, helping women escape toxic relationships and rebuild their lives. It felt like the perfect way to honor him and give back to others who needed a second chance. As for Diane and Jake, they faded into the background of my life. I heard through the grapevine that they struggled in prison, their once perfect image shattered. Diane, who had thrived on control and appearances, couldn't handle the reality of her situation. Jake, without his mother to guide him, floundered. I didn't revel in their downfall, but I didn't pity them either. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. For me, it was enough to know that I had survived their schemes and come out stronger on the other side. Now, as I sit here telling my story, I feel a sense of peace. It wasn't easy to confront the people who tried to destroy me, but it was worth it. I learned that resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about standing up, speaking out, and reclaiming your power. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine. And that, more than anything, is the victory I hold on to. This was my story, and I reclaimed it with courage, dignity, and an unshakable sense of self-worth. My greedy mother-in-law demanded a 50% share of my $10 million restaurant for her younger son. I refused because he was a college dropout with a reckless nature and a habit of wasting money. Enraged, they conspired to burn down my restaurant. However, when they returned home, a shocking surprise awaited them, something they never anticipated. My name is Sophia Anderson, and I built my dream with my own hands. My restaurant, Sophia's Delight, wasn't just a business. It was my heart, my passion, and the culmination of years of hard work. Located in the bustling heart of Chicago, it stood as a beacon of comfort food, laughter, and celebration. I loved every moment of running it, early mornings, late nights, and everything in between. But life has a way of testing you, doesn't it? Success can bring out the best in some people and the worst in others. Looking back, I should have seen the signs, the cracks in the foundation of my relationships. But I didn't. I was 30 years old, married to Michael Anderson, a kind and steady man, or so I thought. Michael was an IT consultant, a calm and logical person who initially supported my dreams. For a while, everything seemed perfect. But perfection is just a mask, isn't it? Beneath the surface, there were things I didn't want to see. And then there was Margaret Anderson, my mother-in-law. She was 60, sharp-tongued, and carried an air of authority wherever she went. Margaret was old-fashioned, the kind of woman who believed a wife's job was to serve her husband and family. She resented my independence and success. I often caught her sneering when people complimented me on my restaurant, as if my achievements were a personal affront to her. Margaret's other son, Ryan, was her pride and joy, or maybe her biggest project. He was 28, a college dropout who always seemed to be chasing one failed venture after another. He was charming in a reckless sort of way, but had a knack for finding trouble. Margaret adored him, always making excuses for his shortcomings. I knew she wanted him to have more, but I never imagined how far she would go to make it happen. When Sophia's Delight began thriving, Margaret's attitude shifted from quiet disdain to outright hostility. It started with little remarks. "You spend more time in that restaurant than with your husband," she'd say with a pointed look. "Do you even cook at home anymore?" I brushed it off at first. Michael told me not to let it bother me. "That's just how she is," he'd say. And maybe he was right. But the comments kept coming, each one a jab aimed at making me feel less than I was. Then one evening, during a family dinner at our house, Margaret dropped her first bombshell. She sat at the table, her wine glass in hand, and announced, "Sophia, I've been thinking. You've built something wonderful with that restaurant. But it's time to think about the family." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well, she said, smiling sweetly. Ryan's been struggling to find his footing. If you gave him a stake in the restaurant, say 50%, he could finally have a solid future. He'd make a great partner. I was stunned. 50%? Half of everything I'd built from scratch? I glanced at Michael, expecting him to step in, but he stayed silent, his eyes fixed on his plate. Margaret, I said as calmly as I could, I appreciate your concern for Ryan, but Sophia's delight is my business. I can't just hand over half of it. Her smile faded, replaced by a hard, icy glare. Family comes first, Sophia. You wouldn't even have that restaurant if it weren't for Michael's support. Her words cut deep, but I refused to back down. Michael supported me because he loves me, and I worked every day to make that restaurant what it is. Ryan's welcome to work hard and create something of his own. The tension at the table was unbearable. Ryan sat there smirking, as if this was some game to him. Margaret, however, was furious. I knew I'd crossed a line, but I wasn't about to compromise my principles. After that night, Margaret's hostility became more open. She stopped visiting the restaurant and made snide comments about me at every family gathering. Michael tried to mediate, but his attempts felt half-hearted. She's just set in her ways, he'd say. Give her time, but time only made things worse. Ryan started dropping by the restaurant uninvited, offering advice on how to run it better. I knew he was acting on Margaret's orders, testing the waters for another attempt to claim a share. I ignored him, focusing instead on expanding the menu, renovating the dining area, and training my staff. Still, the strain was getting to me. I could feel it in my marriage. Michael and I argued more often. He began to echo Margaret's sentiments, telling me I was too focused on my career and not enough on the family. The love and partnership we once had started to feel like a distant memory. One afternoon, Margaret came to the restaurant unannounced. She walked in, her face a mask of false sweetness, and sat at a corner table. I reluctantly joined her. Sophia, she began, I don't know why you're being so difficult. Ryan needs this. We're family. I folded my arms. And I've told you, Margaret, this isn't about being difficult. This is about what's fair. I built this business. I won't give it away. Her eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. Something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. I tried to shake it off, but deep down I knew Margaret wasn't someone who took no for an answer. As I watched her leave that day, I couldn't help but feel that something was coming. Something I wasn't prepared for. And I was right. I should have trusted my instincts that day when Margaret left the restaurant with that chilling warning. There was something in her eyes, a mix of anger and determination, that unsettled me. But I had so much on my plate that I brushed it aside, convincing myself that her words were just empty threats. I should have known better. Margaret was not someone who made idle threats. Life moved on, or at least it seemed to. I threw myself into my work at Sophia's Delight, using the restaurant as both my sanctuary and my purpose. Despite the tension at home, I believed that if I worked hard enough, things would get better. But I was wrong. The storm was brewing, and it was about to hit me in ways I never imagined. The fire happened on a quiet Tuesday night, just after closing. I was at home, exhausted for a long day, when my phone rang. It was my head chef, Julia, her voice frantic. Sophia, the restaurant, it's on fire. My heart stopped.
What?
Are you sure?
Yes.
The fire department's already there, but it looks bad. You need to come right away. I don't even remember how I got there. The drive was a blur, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. When I arrived, I was met with chaos, fire trucks, flashing lights, and smoke billowing into the night sky. My restaurant, my dream, was engulfed in flames. I stood there, frozen, as firefighters worked tirelessly to control the blaze. Julia ran up to me, her face streaked with tears. I'm so sorry, Sophia, she said. I don't know how this happened, neither did I. All I knew was that the sight of Sophia's Delight burning felt like a dagger to my chest. It was as if everything I had worked for was being ripped away from me. The next few days were a whirlwind of devastation and confusion. The fire department conducted an investigation and confirmed what I had feared. It wasn't an accident. The fire had been deliberately set. Arson. The word alone made my stomach turn. Who would do such a thing? Why would anyone want to destroy something so precious to me? My mind raced with possibilities, but nothing made sense until I remembered Margaret's parting words. "You'll regret this." I didn't want to believe it, but a small, persistent voice in the back of my mind whispered that she was capable of it. Still, I needed proof. I couldn't let suspicion turn into accusation without evidence. As the investigation unfolded, I found myself haunted by anxiety and anger. Michael was no comfort. He tried to be supportive at first, but his patience wore thin as I became consumed by the search for answers. "Maybe you should just focus on rebuilding," he said one night as we sat in the living room. "Rebuilding?" I snapped. "Michael, someone burned down my restaurant. Don't you want to know who did it?" "Of course I do, but what good does obsessing over do? The insurance will cover the damages. Let it go, Sophia." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Let it go? How could he be so dismissive? This wasn't just about the money. This was about betrayal, about someone deliberately trying to destroy my life. That conversation planted a seed of doubt in my mind about Michael. I began to wonder if he truly understood me anymore, or if he ever really had. Then came the breakthrough. The restaurant's security cameras had survived the fire, and the footage was recoverable. I couldn't describe the mix of fear and determination I felt as I sat in front of the laptop, watching the recordings with the investigator. And there it was, the truth laid bare in black and white. The footage showed Margaret and Ryan sneaking into the restaurant late at night. They carried cans of gasoline, their movements swift and deliberate. Margaret, with her usual composure, directed Ryan as he poured the fuel around the dining area. Then, with a flick of a lighter, they set my dreams ablaze. I felt sick. My hands shook as I watched the flames roar to life on the screen. My own mother-in-law, my brother-in-law, they had done this to me. Armed with the evidence, I went to the police. Margaret and Ryan were arrested shortly after, their faces plastered across local news stations. The community was shocked. How could a mother and son stoop so low? But what hurt me the most was Michael's reaction. He wasn't angry at his mother or brother. Instead, he was angry at me. "This is what happens when you push people away," he said, his voice cold. "You've been so focused on that restaurant that you've forgotten about the family. If you had just listened to her." I couldn't let him finish. "Are you serious, Michael? You're blaming me for this? They burned down my restaurant. Your mother and brother committed a crime, and you're saying it's my fault." "I'm saying it didn't have to come to this," he shot back. "You could have handled things differently." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I thought I could rely on, the man I loved, was defending them. It felt like another betrayal, one I wasn't prepared for. That night, I lay awake, replaying everything in my mind. The fire, the betrayal, Michael's words, it was all too much. I realized then that something had shifted between us, something I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about Margaret or Ryan. This was about Michael too. He wasn't the man I thought he was, and I couldn't keep pretending otherwise. The fire had destroyed more than my restaurant. It had destroyed the foundation of my marriage. And deep down, I knew what I had to do. I never thought I'd reach a point where I'd question my entire marriage. Michael had been my rock, my partner, and the one person I thought I could lean on when the world turned against me. But the fire changed everything. It didn't just destroy Sophia's delight. It exposed cracks in my relationship that I could no longer ignore. After Margaret and Ryan's arrest, the days that followed were suffocating. I couldn't escape the whispers of betrayal or the judgmental stares from people in our community. But the worst part wasn't the external scrutiny. It was the cold, growing distance between Michael and me. At first, I thought he was in shock. After all, it couldn't have been easy for him to process the fact that his mother and brother were responsible for something so heinous. I tried to give him space, hoping he'd come around. But the more I tried, the more he withdrew. One evening, I decided to confront him directly. It was late, and we were sitting in the living room. The silence between us was unbearable. "Michael," I began cautiously, "we need to talk." He glanced at me, his expression weary. "About what?" "About us," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About what happened." He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Sophia, I don't know what you want me to say. It's a mess, okay? I know that." "A mess?" I repeated, incredulous. "Your mother and brother burned down my restaurant, Michael. They destroyed everything I worked for. And instead of being angry at them, you're blaming me?" "I'm not blaming you," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I just think this whole thing could have been avoided. If you'd been more flexible, maybe they wouldn't have felt pushed to do something so drastic." The words hit me like a slap. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Flexible? You think I should have just handed over half of my restaurant? The restaurant I built from nothing? To Ryan, of all people. "Their family, Sophia," he said, his voice rising. "Maybe it wasn't fair, but sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the people you care about." I stared at him, my heart sinking. "So that's it? You think I should have let them walk all over me? That it's my fault they committed a crime?" "I didn't say it's your fault," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. I don't know, Sophia. This whole situation is tearing us apart." And there it was. The truth. Michael wasn't angry at his mother and brother because, deep down, he thought I was to blame. Maybe he didn't say it outright, but his actions, his words, and his indifference all pointed to the same conclusion. He didn't see me as his equal. He saw me as an obstacle in the way of his family's unity. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal. But beneath it all was a growing clarity. This wasn't just about the fire or Margaret's schemes. This was about Michael's inability to stand by me when I needed him the most. I realized then that I couldn't continue like this. The fire had already destroyed my restaurant. I wouldn't let it destroy me too. The next morning, I made my decision. I sat down at the kitchen table and waited for Michael to join me. When he did, I took a deep breath and spoke the words I never thought I'd say. "I want a divorce." Michael froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "What?" he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I can't be with someone who doesn't respect me or support me. You chose your family over me, Michael. And I can't live with that." He set the cup down, his face a mixture of shock and anger. "You're seriously doing this? After everything we've been through?" "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. "Because I deserve better. I deserve someone who believes in me, who stands by me when things get tough. And that's not you." The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Filing for divorce felt like closing the door on a chapter one wasn't ready to let go of, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Michael begged me to reconsider at first, but his pleas were half-hearted, as if even he knew this was inevitable. Through it all, I clung to one thought. I had survived the fire, and I would survive this too. Margaret and Ryan had tried to destroy me, but they had failed. I wasn't about to let their actions define me or my future. I started making plans to rebuild Sophia's delight. The insurance payout would cover some of the costs, but I knew it would take more than money to bring my dream back to life. It would take resilience, determination, and an unshakable belief in myself. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was ready for the challenge. The fire might have taken my restaurant, and Michael's betrayal might have taken my trust, but neither could take my spirit.
I was stronger than that. I was stronger than them.
The days after my divorce felt like walking through rubble. Everything I thought I'd built, my marriage, my place in Michael's family, and even the walls of Sophia's delight, had been reduced to ashes. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you can rebuild. You have to. It wasn't easy. The insurance payout gave me a start, but the real challenge was finding the strength to begin again. Standing in the charred remains of my restaurant, I felt both grief and determination. The memories of what had been lost hurt, but they also reminded me of what I was capable of creating. I started small. The first step was clearing the debris, brick by brick. a symbolic gesture that felt like therapy. The old space wasn't salvageable, so I decided to relocate. A charming corner property became the new home of Sophia's delight. It was a risk, but I had no choice but to take it. I was blessed to have people who believed in me. My head chef, Julia, was one of them. "You're stronger than this, Sophia," she told me. "And I'll be here every step of the way." Her words fueled me. Slowly, I rebuilt my team and worked tirelessly to bring my vision to life. I threw myself into every detail, choosing new furniture, redesigning the menu, and rebranding the restaurant. This wasn't just about reopening, it was about proving to myself that I could rise above everything that had been done to me. Meanwhile, news of Margaret and Ryan's arrest spread quickly. Their trial became a public spectacle, and I attended every court date, not for vengeance, but for closure. Watching them face the consequences of their actions was both painful and validating. Margaret, once so smug and self-assured, looked like a shadow of herself. Ryan, too, avoided my gaze, his charm replaced by shame. The court's ruling was swift. Both were convicted of arson and sentenced to prison. As the verdict was read, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and even a twinge of pity. But most of all, I felt free. The reopening of Sophia's delight was nothing short of magical. The new space felt fresh, vibrant, and alive. On opening night, the dining room was packed with loyal customers and new faces alike. The support from the community was overwhelming. Many people had followed my story and admired my resilience. I realized then that I hadn't just rebuilt a restaurant. I'd rebuilt myself. Michael didn't show up that night, and I didn't expect him to. We hadn't spoken since the divorce was finalized. I heard he'd moved out of Chicago, unable to face the fallout of his family's actions. A part of me wished him well, but another part knew I was better off without him. As I stood in the middle of the bustling dining room, watching happy customers enjoy the fruits of my labor, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Yes, I had been betrayed by Margaret, Ryan, and even Michael in his own way. But their betrayal didn't define me.
My resilience did.
This is my story, one of fire and ashes, of heartbreak and healing, and of strength and triumph. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that no matter how much the world tries to break you, you can always rise again. Stronger, wiser, and unstoppable.